Opening, in the style of Scheherazade. Listen well, O fortunate ones who rest beneath the stars of comfort, for I shall weave for you a tale of wonder and enchantment, a story whispered through the sands of time, carried on desert winds from the ancient lands where the sun rises like molten gold over endless dunes. In the days when Jinn still walked among mortals, when magic carpets soared through moonlit skies, and when the very stones of the earth held secrets waiting to be discovered, there lived a sultan whose palace touched the clouds, whose treasury overflowed with jewels from the farthest corners of the world, yet whose heart was as barren as the salt flats beyond the mountains. But this tale, O blessed listeners, does not begin in marble halls or perfumed gardens. No, it begins in the humblest of places, where the true treasures of the human spirit shine brighter than all the diamonds in a sultan's crown. For Allah, in His infinite wisdom, often plants the seeds of greatness in the poorest soil, that they might grow strong through adversity and bloom with the fragrance of compassion. So close your eyes, dear ones, and let your minds journey with me to a small village at the edge of a great desert, where the houses were made of mud and straw, where the wells ran nearly dry in summer's heat, and where poverty sat like an unwelcome guest at every family's table. Yet in this forgotten corner of the world where merchants rarely ventured and where the Sultan's tax collectors came only to take what little remained, there lived a young man whose story would be told for 1,000 years and 1,000 more. Chapter 1. The Young Man from the Poor Hut. In this village of bent backs and empty stomachs, where children learned hunger before they learned to walk, there lived a young man named Hakim. 25 summers had passed over his head, each one teaching him new lessons about suffering and endurance, yet never managing to extinguish the light of kindness that burned in his heart like an eternal flame. Hakim's dwelling could barely be called a home. 4 walls of sun-dried mud, patched with straw and hope, a roof that leaked tears of rain during the brief wet season, and a floor of packed earth worn smooth by generations of bare feet. His father had died when Hakim was but 7 years old, crushed beneath a collapsing wall while laboring for a wealthy merchant who never even learned his name. His mother, may Allah grant her peace, had followed 3 winters later, her body finally surrendering to a cough that rattled like dry bones in her chest. A cough that the village healer could not cure with herbs, for the only true medicine she needed was food and warmth, neither of which the family could afford. Since that sorrowful day, Hakim had lived alone, yet in truth he was never lonely, for the entire village had become his family. You see, dear listeners, Hakim possessed something rarer than gold and more precious than pearls from the depths of the ocean. He possessed a heart that felt the pain of others as keenly as his own, and hands that were always ready to help, even when they themselves were empty. Each morning, before the sun painted the eastern mountains with its amber brush, Hakim would rise from his thin mat and begin his day not with thoughts of his own hunger, but with concern for others. Old grandmother Zara, whose eyes had grown cloudy with age and whose children had long since forgotten her, would find fresh water from the well waiting by her door, drawn by Hakim's strong arms in the cool darkness before dawn. He never announced himself, never sought thanks, but Zahra knew the footsteps of her secret helper, and she would whisper blessings for him into the wind. The widow Mariam, struggling to raise 4 children after her husband was taken by fever, would discover small bundles of kindling by her cooking fire, gathered by Hakim from his own meager supply. When she tried to thank him, he would simply say, "The wind must have blown them here, Aunt Mariam. How fortunate that the wind knows where wood is needed most. The village orphans, and there were many, for poverty breeds tragedy as surely as standing water breeds mosquitoes, knew Hakim as the elder brother who would share his last piece of bread, though his own stomach cramped with hunger. He would tell them stories while they ate, magnificent tales of brave princes and magical creatures, of gardens where trees bore jeweled fruit and streams that ran with honey. The children would forget their hardships for a while, transported by his words to lands where no child ever went to bed hungry, where every tear was dried by a loving hand. "Tell us about the golden antelope," little Ahmed would plead, his eyes bright despite the dirt on his face and the patches on his clothes. "Ah, the golden antelope," Hakim would say, his voice taking on the mysterious tone of a master storyteller. "They say she lives deep in the whispering forest, where the trees speak secrets to those who know how to listen. Her coat shines like the sun itself, and her hooves can strike gold from common stone. But she appears only to those whose hearts are pure, whose intentions are selfless. Many hunters have sought her, driven by greed, but she vanishes like morning mist before their arrows can fly." "Have you seen her, Brother Hakim?" the children would ask, clustering closer. "Perhaps in dreams," he would answer with a gentle smile. "But sometimes, little ones, dreams are just reality waiting to be born." The village elders watched Hakim with a mixture of admiration and concern. Here was a young man who gave when he had nothing to give, who smiled when he had every reason to weep, who stood straight when the weight of poverty should have bent him double. "You cannot save everyone, my son," the imam would tell him after prayers. "You must think of yourself as well. How can you help others if you waste away to nothing?" "Respected uncle," Hakim would reply, his eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond his years. "When I ease the suffering of another, even for a moment, my own suffering becomes lighter. When I share my bread, it multiplies in my heart, if not in my hands. Is it not written that Allah loves those who love their fellow beings?" The imam could only nod and place a weathered hand on the young man's shoulder, feeling the bones sharp beneath the thin fabric of his worn shirt, yet also feeling the strength that dwelt there. Not the strength of muscle, but the strength of spirit that moves mountains one pebble at a time. As the years of his youth passed, Hakim became known throughout the village not for any great deed or remarkable skill, but for the constancy of his compassion. He was the one who would sit with the dying, holding their hands as they passed from this world to the next, whispering prayers and promises that their families would be looked after. He was the one who would share the village's joys as readily as their sorrows, dancing at weddings with an energy that belied his daily hunger, celebrating new births as if each child were his own. The merchants who occasionally passed through the village, their camels laden with goods for the cities, would sometimes toss copper coins to the begging children. They noticed how one young man would gather the children afterward, ensuring the coins were shared fairly, that the weakest received their portion, that no one was forgotten. Some merchants were moved by this sight, others merely shrugged and moved on, but all remembered the tall, thin youth with eyes that held both sadness and unshakable hope. One particularly hot summer, when the desert wind blew like the breath of a furnace and the village well had almost run dry, disaster struck. The little rain that usually fell had not come, and the few scrawny goats and chickens that people kept began to die. The vegetable patches that provided meager sustenance withered under the brutal sun. Hunger, always a familiar visitor, now moved in as a permanent resident, and despair settled over the village like a burial shroud. It was then that Hakim made a decision that would change not only his life, but the fate of everyone he held dear. He had heard from traveling merchants that in the great forest beyond the desert there was wood to be gathered, wood that could be sold in the city markets for enough money to buy grain. The journey was dangerous, 3 days through the desert, where bandits prowled and where the sun could kill a man as surely as any blade. The forest itself was said to be cursed, filled with jinn and wild beasts, where strange lights danced at night and travelers disappeared without a trace. But Hakim looked at the hollow eyes of the children, at the elderly growing weaker each day, at the mothers trying to nurse babies with milk their starved bodies could not produce, and he knew he had no choice. "I will go to the forest," he announced at the village gathering. "I will bring back wood to sell, and with the money we will buy food for everyone." The elders protested. "You will die in the desert or be eaten by the forest demons. We cannot lose you, Hakim. You are the heart of this village." "A heart is worthless if it does not beat for others," Hakim replied. "I have lived 25 years by the grace of Allah and the kindness of this village. Now let me repay that debt. If I die trying to help my family, for you are all my family, then I die with purpose. Is that not better than watching us all slowly fade away?" There was no arguing with such determination, such selfless courage. The village women packed what little food they could spare for his journey: a handful of dates, hard bread that would not spoil, a leather water skin patched many times but still able to hold the precious liquid. The men offered advice about the desert crossing, the safest paths, the signs of approaching sandstorms. The children clung to him, making him promise to return, to bring back stories of his adventures. Old grandmother Zara, nearly blind now but still sharp of mind, called him close. "You have the blessed heart, young Hakim," she whispered, her voice like rustling papyrus. "I have lived long enough to recognize those whom fate has marked for greatness. The suffering you have endured, the kindness you have shown, these are not random threads but part of a great tapestry being woven by hands we cannot see. Go with my blessing, child, and remember, when you find yourself in the darkest place, it is then that your inner light shines brightest." She pressed something into his hand, a small amulet on a leather cord worn smooth by countless years of handling. "This belonged to my grandmother's grandmother. They say it carries the protection of one who was once helped by a stranger's kindness. Wear it, and perhaps that ancient kindness will shield you in turn." Chapter 2. The Forest, the Firewood, and the Cry of Pain. 3 days later, Hakim stood at the edge of the whispering forest, his feet bleeding from the desert crossing, his water gone, his body trembling from exhaustion and hunger. The journey had been even harder than expected. On the second night, a sandstorm had forced him to huddle behind a rock formation, the wind howling like 1,000 jinn, sand finding its way into every fold of his clothing, his eyes, his mouth. He had thought he would be buried alive, another nameless victim of the desert's cruelty, but as dawn broke, the storm passed, leaving him half buried but alive. Now, the forest loomed before him like a living wall of green and shadow. The trees were ancient, their trunks so thick that 5 men holding hands could not encircle them. Their branches intertwined overhead, creating a canopy so dense that even at midday, the forest floor was shrouded in perpetual twilight. And true to its name, the forest did whisper. The wind through the leaves created a constant susurration, like 1,000 voices speaking in a language just beyond understanding. Hakim touched the amulet at his chest, took a deep breath that tasted of moss and mystery, and stepped into the forest. The temperature dropped immediately, the cool shade a blessed relief after the desert's furnace heat. His eyes slowly adjusted to the dimness, revealing a world unlike anything he had ever seen. Vines as thick as his arm hung like serpents from the branches. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, purple so deep it was almost black, blue that seemed to glow with its own light. Birds called in haunting melodies, and occasionally Hakim caught glimpses of creatures he could not name, something that might have been a monkey but with eyes too intelligent, too knowing. A butterfly with wings that looked like stained glass, casting rainbow patterns as it flew through shafts of sunlight. But Hakim had not come to marvel at wonders. He had come for wood, and wood was everywhere. Fallen branches littered the forest floor, dry and perfect for burning. He began to gather them, creating a pile, then fashioning a carrier from vines to bundle them together. His back already ached from the desert crossing, and now it screamed in protest as he lifted bundle after bundle. But he thought of the children's hungry faces and continued. Hours passed in this labor. The forest seemed to watch him, and more than once, Hakim had the sensation of being observed by unseen eyes. But whether it was curiosity or malevolence, he could not tell. He worked steadily, methodically, trying not to think about the return journey. 3 days through the desert carrying heavy wood, with no food and no water, until he could reach the oasis at the halfway point. It was as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the forest canopy with gold and crimson, that Hakim heard it, a sound that stopped him mid-motion, a bundle of sticks falling from his suddenly nerveless fingers. It was a cry of pain, so filled with anguish that it seemed to pierce straight through to his soul. But this was no human cry. It was animal, yet somehow more than animal. There was an intelligence in that sound, a desperation that transcended species. Hakim stood frozen, his mind warring with itself. He had gathered enough wood. He should leave now. Begin the journey back before nightfall made the forest even more dangerous. Whatever was making that sound was not his concern. He had his own people to worry about, his own mission to complete. The cry came again, weaker this time, and with it came a sound that Hakim knew all too well, the rattle of chains. Something was trapped. "It is not your concern," he told himself firmly, bending to retrieve his dropped bundle. "You cannot save every creature in the world. Your village needs you. The children need the food this wood will buy." But even as he tried to walk away, his feet seemed to move of their own accord toward the sound. Through a thick curtain of hanging vines, around the massive trunk of a tree that must have stood for 1,000 years. And there, in a small clearing, where the last rays of sunlight created a pool of golden light, Hakim saw a sight that would haunt him forever if he walked away. An antelope, but like no antelope he had ever seen or imagined. Its coat seemed to shimmer, catching the light in a way that made it appear almost golden. Its eyes, large and liquid, held an intelligence that was unmistakably conscious, aware, and it was caught in the cruelest trap Hakim had ever seen. Metal teeth clamped around one delicate leg, chains wrapped around its body, and wooden stakes driven deep into the ground to prevent escape. Blood seeped from where the trap's teeth bit into flesh, and the creature's sides heaved with exhaustion from what must have been hours or days of struggle. The antelope's eyes met Hakim's, and in them he saw recognition, plea, and strangely, resignation, as if it had been calling for help, but no longer expected any to come. Hakim took a step forward, then stopped. This was clearly a hunter's trap, an expensive one. Whoever had set it would return. If he freed the antelope, he might be accused of theft. In the Sultan's land, interfering with a hunter's rightful catch could mean the loss of a hand, or worse. And this was no ordinary animal. Even through its pain and distress, there was something magical about it, something that whispered of value beyond measure. The hunter who had set this trap was probably wealthy, powerful, dangerous. "I cannot," Hakim whispered, taking a step back. "I'm sorry, beautiful creature, but I cannot risk it. My village—" The antelope did not cry out again. It simply watched him with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and somehow that silence was worse than any sound it could have made. It was the silence of acceptance, of one who had known kindness existed in the world, but had learned not to expect it. Hakim made it 3 steps before he stopped, his hands clenched into fists, his whole body trembling with an internal war. He thought of the children in his village, waiting for him to return with salvation. He thought of his promise to them, his responsibility. But he also thought of every time someone had passed by suffering they could have eased, simply because it was not their problem. He thought of his mother, dying of her cough while wealthy merchants rode past their hut without a glance. He thought of his father, crushed beneath a wall, and how the merchant had simply hired another laborer the next day, not even pausing in his counting of gold coins. "If I walk away from suffering I can ease," Hakim said aloud, his voice steady now with resolve. "Then I become like those who walked away from ours. If I save my body but lose my soul, what have I gained?" He turned back to the antelope, whose eyes now held a flicker of something that might have been hope. "Be still, noble one," Hakim said softly, approaching slowly as one might approach a frightened child. "I know you understand me somehow. I can see it in your eyes. I will free you, though it may cost me everything. Be still and trust me." The trap was ingenious in its cruelty. The metal teeth were designed to tighten if the victim struggled, and the chains were arranged in a pattern that would cause more pain with every movement. Hakim studied it carefully, his fingers exploring the mechanism despite the antelope's blood that covered it. The metal was well-oiled, expensive. This was not the trap of a common hunter, but of someone who hunted for sport, for the pleasure of capturing something beautiful and rare. "This will hurt," Hakim warned, his hands finding the release mechanism, "but it will be the last hurt from this evil thing." The antelope made a soft sound, almost like acknowledgement, and held perfectly still. Hakim pressed the release, and the metal teeth sprang open with a snap that echoed through the clearing. The antelope shuddered but did not cry out. Quickly Hakim unwound the chains, his hands gentle despite their urgency. The sun was setting fast now, and whoever had set this trap might return at any moment. As the last chain fell away, Hakim examined the wounded leg. The damage was severe. Deep punctures that wept blood, possibly broken bones beneath. The antelope tried to stand and immediately collapsed, its injured leg unable to bear weight. "You cannot run," Hakim said, his heart sinking. "And I cannot leave you here for them to find again." Without really thinking about what he was doing, driven by the same instinct that had made him turn back, Hakim tore strips from his already tattered shirt and began binding the wound. The antelope watched him work, so still it might have been carved from gold-flecked stone. "I will carry you," Hakim decided, though he knew it was madness. He could barely carry the wood he needed, and now he proposed to carry a wounded antelope through the forest and across the desert. "I will find a place to hide you, to tend your wounds properly. Then, when you are healed, you can return to your forest." He lifted the antelope carefully, surprised to find it weighed less than he expected, as if it were made of light itself rather than flesh and bone. The creature nestled against his chest, its head resting on his shoulder with a trust that nearly brought tears to his eyes. Behind them, as they left the clearing, Hakim heard something that chilled his blood, voices approaching fast, and the baying of hunting dogs. "The trap's been sprung," a rough voice shouted. The golden one must be there, quickly, before it escapes. Hakim ran. Piri. Chapter 3. The Miraculous Healing and the Antelope's Secret. Through the darkening forest, Hakim fled, the antelope cradled in his arms, branches tearing at his clothes and skin, roots trying to trip him with every step. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, dogs barking, men cursing, the crash of bodies through undergrowth. The antelope pressed closer to him, its rapid heartbeat matching his own. The forest, which had seemed merely mysterious before, now became an active participant in their flight. Paths appeared where none had been before, leading Hakim away from his pursuers. Thorny vines seemed to part for him but close behind him, slowing those who followed. A stream appeared suddenly, allowing him to wade through and mask their scent from the dogs. Still the hunters came on, relentless, and Hakim's strength, already depleted from his desert crossing and day of labor, began to fail. His legs trembled, his breath came in gasps that burned his throat, and spots danced before his eyes. It was then that the antelope spoke. Turn left at the great stone, then through the hollow tree. Hakim nearly dropped the creature in shock, but there was no time for amazement. He followed the directions, finding a stone covered in ancient symbols, and, beyond it, a tree with a hollow large enough for a man to pass through. On the other side was a cave hidden behind a curtain of vines, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. He ducked inside just as the sound of the dogs grew almost unbearably close. The cave was small but dry, with a sandy floor and walls that sparkled with some kind of mineral that gave off a faint, phosphorescent glow, enough to see by, barely. "Be silent now," the antelope whispered, and Hakim obeyed, though his mind reeled with questions. They heard the hunters pass by, so close that Hakim could make out their words. Impossible! It was here. The tracks led right to this spot. That was the golden antelope, I'm certain of it. Do you know what the Sultan would pay for such a creature? Check everywhere. It cannot have vanished into air. For an hour they searched, while Hakim held his breath and the antelope lay still as death in his arms. Finally, as full darkness fell, the hunters gave up. We'll return at dawn with more men. It's wounded. It cannot have gone far. Post guards at all the forest exits. Their voices faded into the distance, and finally Hakim allowed himself to breathe properly. He set the antelope down gently on the soft sand and collapsed beside it, his body shaking with exhaustion and delayed fear. "You spoke," he said finally, wondering if hunger and fatigue had driven him to hallucinations. "I did," the antelope replied, its voice melodious like wind chimes made of silver. "And I must thank you, kind human, for risking your life for mine. It has been so long since I encountered such selflessness." "What? What are you?" Hakim asked, though even as he spoke he was examining the antelope's wounded leg in the dim light. "I am what you see, an antelope, also more than what you see. But first, tend to your own wounds, brave one. You bleed from many places." Only then did Hakim notice the cuts covering his arms and legs from their flight through the forest. He shrugged. "I've had worse. Your leg needs attention first." The antelope made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Of course you would say that. Very well, but know this, your kindness will not go unrewarded." Through the night, Hakim worked by the cave's faint light. He ventured out once to gather specific plants the antelope described: moss that stopped bleeding, leaves that prevented infection, bark that numbed pain. He found fresh water dripping from the cave ceiling into a natural basin, sweet and pure. He cleaned the wounds, applied the forest medicines, and fashioned a splint from straight branches and strips torn from his remaining clothes. The antelope bore it all with patience, occasionally offering advice in that musical voice, As Hakim worked, they talked, and he found himself telling this magical creature about his village, about the starving children, about his desperate mission to gather wood. "You abandoned your vital task for me," the antelope said softly. "Your people suffer, yet you stopped to help a stranger." "Suffering is suffering," Hakim replied, tightening the last bandage. "How could I choose whose pain matters more? I could not save my mother or father, could not ease their passing, but I could save you. Perhaps that is enough." "Perhaps it is everything," the antelope murmured. As dawn light began to filter into the cave, Hakim knew he had to leave. The hunters would return, and he needed to get back to his village, but the antelope could barely stand, let alone run. "Go," the antelope said. "You have done more than enough. I will hide here and heal. And when the hunters find you, then they find me. It is not your burden to bear." Hakim looked at this magical creature, so accepting of its fate, and made another decision that logic would call foolish, but his heart knew was right. "I'm taking you with me," he announced. "Across the desert? Impossible. I will slow you down, and you have no food or water. You will die trying to save me. Then I die trying," Hakim said simply, lifting the antelope despite its protests. "I've made my choice." The journey that followed should have been impossible. Hakim had no food, his water was limited to what he could carry from the cave in a makeshift skin, and he bore the additional weight of the wounded antelope. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, each step through the sand an agony of effort. His lips cracked, his tongue swelled, his vision blurred. On the second day, when Hakim collapsed to his knees, unable to go further, the antelope spoke again. "Put me down, dear friend. You have carried me far enough." Hakim set the creature on the sand, then fell beside it, his body finally failing him completely. He thought of his village, of the children he had failed, and tears that his dehydrated body could not produce burned behind his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I've failed everyone." "No," the antelope said firmly. "You have passed the test." Despite his exhaustion, Hakim managed to turn his head to look at the creature. As he watched, the antelope's golden coat began to truly glow, not with reflected light, but with an inner radiance. Its wounds faded as if they had never been. It stood, whole and healthy, and touched its nose to Hakim's forehead. Immediately, Hakim felt strength flow through him. His thirst vanished, his wounds healed, his exhaustion replaced by a vitality he had never known. "What test?" he asked, sitting up in amazement. The antelope settled beside him on the sand, no longer injured, its coat shimmering with impossible beauty in the desert sun. "I am not merely an antelope," it began. "I am a guardian of ancient magic, placed in this world to find those whose hearts are pure enough to wield great power without being corrupted by it. For 100 years I have waited in that forest, allowing myself to be trapped again and again, waiting for someone who would free me not for reward, not for glory, but simply because it was right." Hakim stared in wonder as the antelope continued. "Hunters have found me, yes. Some freed me hoping I would grant wishes. Others tried to capture me for profit. A few even helped me, but always with conditions, always expecting something in return. You are the first who helped me knowing it would cost you everything, who carried me despite your own desperate need, who chose my life over your own and your village's welfare. This is the purity of heart I was sent to find. But I'm nobody special," Hakim protested. "I'm just a poor young man trying to help his village." "Exactly," the antelope said, and there was warmth in its supernatural voice. "Now, let me show you something." The antelope raised one delicate hoof and brought it down on a common stone. Where the hoof struck, the stone transformed into gold, pure, gleaming gold that caught the desert sun like captured fire. Hakim's eyes widened, but his first words were not what most would say. "Can you do that whenever you wish?" "I can," the antelope confirmed. Then you could help my village. The children wouldn't have to starve. The elderly could have medicine. We could dig new wells, plant gardens, build proper homes." The antelope made that laughing sound again. "And there it is. Even now, your first thought is for others. This is why you have been chosen, Hakim of the kind heart. But listen carefully, for with this gift comes responsibility." The antelope's eyes grew serious, ancient wisdom shining in their depths. "The gold I create is real, lasting, and pure, but it must be used wisely. Gold given too freely breeds laziness and greed. Gold hoarded breeds corruption and evil. Gold displayed breeds envy and violence. You must be clever, careful, and always remember that the true wealth is not in the metal, but in what it can accomplish for those in need." "I understand," Hakim said, though in truth the magnitude of this gift was only beginning to dawn on him. "There is more," the antelope continued. "I am bound to you now by your selflessness and my choice. I will stay with you, help you, for as long as you remain true to the pure heart that saved me. But if you ever use this gift for selfish gain, if you ever forget the suffering of others in favor of your own comfort, the magic will leave and I will vanish like morning dew. I would never—" "You say that now," the antelope interrupted gently, "but wealth has a way of changing people. Power corrupts, even the power to do good. You must guard against this always." They sat together in the desert for a while, a young man in tattered clothes and a magical antelope, while the sun traced its path across the sky. Finally, Hakim asked the practical question, "How do we help my village without revealing your secret? If people know about you, they will try to capture you, use you. Now, you begin to think like a guardian of magic." The antelope approved. "We must be subtle, clever. You will return with gold, yes, but you will claim you found it in the desert. A lost merchant's cash, perhaps. You will distribute it slowly, carefully, always ensuring it goes where needed most. And I will remain hidden, your secret, visiting you only when safe." "But your leg is healed, as are all your wounds. See for yourself." Hakim looked down at his arms and saw unmarked skin where deep scratches had been. He felt strong, rested, as if he had slept for days rather than struggled through the desert. "This is my gift to you," the antelope said. "Health, strength to do your work. Now, shall we create some gold for your village?" Over the next hour, the antelope touched stone after stone, creating a small fortune in gold pieces. Hakim wrapped them carefully in his tattered shirt, making a bundle that would be heavy but not impossibly so. "This is enough to feed your village for months if spent wisely," the antelope said. "I will meet you again in 3 days, at the old well outside your village, the one that has been dry for years. Come alone at midnight, and we will plan how best to continue helping your people." "You're not coming with me?" It would raise too many questions. A man returning with gold is fortune. A man returning with a magical antelope is a target. "Go now, dear friend. Your people need you." Hakim wanted to protest, but he saw the wisdom in the antelope's words. He bowed deeply to the creature, this magical being that had changed his life in a single day. "Thank you," he said simply, but with all his heart. "No, Hakim. Thank you. You have restored my faith in humanity. Now go, and remember, be clever, be careful, and always, always be kind." Chapter 4: Gold for Hungry Hearts. Hakim's return to the village was like the arrival of rain after years of drought. He stumbled in at sunset and within moments was surrounded by worried faces. They had feared him dead when he had not returned as expected. "Hakim, you're alive! We thought the desert had claimed you. Did you reach the forest? Did you find wood?" He raised his hands for silence, swaying on his feet in what was only partly an act. Despite his magical healing, the emotional exhaustion was real. "I found something better than wood," he said, and produced a single gold coin from his bundle. The silence that followed was complete, as if the entire village had forgotten how to breathe. Then pandemonium erupted. Questions flew like arrows. Hands reached out just to touch the gold, to confirm it was real. The village elder, Ibrahim, finally restored order. "How?" he asked simply. Hakim had prepared his story carefully during the walk back. "A sandstorm on my second night in the desert," he began. "I took shelter behind rocks, and when the storm passed, it had uncovered something. The remains of a merchant's caravan, perhaps, lost years ago. There were bones, may they rest in peace, and scattered among them these." He carefully revealed perhaps a tenth of the gold he carried, still enough to make everyone gasp. "It must be returned to the merchant's family," someone said, but others immediately argued. "What merchant? What family? This could have been lost for decades." "It is the will of Allah," the Imam declared. "Who else but the Merciful One would send a sandstorm to reveal treasure just when his children needed it most?" Ibrahim raised his hand for silence again. "The question is not where it came from, but what we do with it. Hakim found it. It belongs to him." "No," Hakim said firmly. "It belongs to us all. I went seeking salvation for our village, and I found it. But we must be wise. If word spreads that we have gold, what do you think will happen?" Everyone knew the answer. Tax collectors would come, or bandits, or both. The gold would be taken, and they would be worse off than before. "We spend it carefully," Hakim continued. "First, food and medicine for the weakest among us. Then, bit by bit, improvements that won't draw attention. A repaired well here, new tools there. We must appear to be surviving through hard work and Allah's blessing, not through sudden wealth." The village council agreed, and Hakim was placed in charge of distributing the gold, a responsibility he accepted with both honor and trepidation. That very night, he gave the first coins to the families with starving children, but with strict instructions. "Tell no one where this came from," he said to each family. "Buy food in the market tomorrow, but not all from one merchant. Say you sold family heirlooms, or that a relative in the city sent help. We must not draw attention." Old grandmother Zara was the only one who looked at him with knowing eyes when he pressed coins into her withered hands. "The desert gives up its secrets to those who deserve them," she said mysteriously. "But I think perhaps the desert had help, yes?" Hakim only smiled and moved on to the next family. Over the following days, the village began to transform, but so gradually that no outsider would notice immediately. Children's cheeks lost their hollow appearance. The elderly stopped coughing through the night. Mothers could afford oil for their lamps, extending the day's productivity into evening hours. But Hakim was clever in his generosity. He didn't simply hand out gold. Instead, he created opportunities for people to earn it. "Uncle Omar," he said to the village carpenter whose tools had long since been sold for food, "I have gold to repair the mosque's roof, but I need a craftsman. Will you take the job?" Omar's eyes filled with tears. To work again, to have purpose beyond mere survival. This was worth more than the gold itself. "Aunt Fatima," he said to the woman who once made the finest bread in the region, "if you had an oven again and flour, could you bake for the whole village? I could pay you for your work." And so it went. The blacksmith received gold to buy metal and coal, then earned more gold repairing tools. The weaver got thread and yarn, then sold her cloth back to the village fund. Everyone had work, everyone had purpose, and everyone ate. 3 nights after his return, at the stroke of midnight, Hakim crept out to the old dry well. His heart beat rapidly as he approached, half expecting to find nothing, to discover the whole experience had been a desert dream. But there, bathed in moonlight, stood the golden antelope. "Hello, my friend," the creature said warmly. "I have been watching. You've done well." "It's working," Hakim said excitedly, keeping his voice low. "The village is coming alive again, but I've used most of the gold already. There's so much need." "Then we shall make more," the antelope said simply. "But first, tell me everything. I want to hear about each family, each life touched." So Hakim talked, sharing stories of little Ahmed, who had laughed for the first time in months, of the widow Mariam, whose children now had sandals for their feet, of the old men who sat straighter now that their bellies were full. The antelope listened with what could only be described as joy. "This is what magic is meant for," the creature said when Hakim finished. "Not for conquest or glory, but for this, the simple happiness of hearts no longer hungry. Now, let us create more gold, but remember our caution." They developed a pattern. Every few nights, Hakim would sneak out to meet the antelope in different hidden places. The creature would create gold from stones, always just enough to keep the village thriving, but never so much as to arouse suspicion. Hakim would then find small caches in believable places, buried in his garden while digging, hidden in a wall he was repairing, discovered in an old jar in the abandoned potter's workshop. The village began to develop a mythology around Hakim's luck. "He has the blessed touch," they would say. "Everything he touches turns to gold." They didn't know how literally true this was. As weeks turned to months, the transformation became remarkable. The village well was properly repaired and deepened, reaching sweet water that flowed even in dry seasons. Small gardens flourished with new seeds and tools. Children attended lessons from a teacher Hakim hired from a neighboring town, paying him enough to make the journey worthwhile. But the most beautiful transformation was in the spirits of the people. Where once they had walked with bent backs and downcast eyes, now they stood straight and smiled. Where once they had hoarded the little they had, now they shared freely, knowing there would be enough tomorrow. The mosque, beautifully repaired, rang with prayers of gratitude rather than desperation. Yet Hakim remained unchanged by the wealth that flowed through his hands. He still lived in his simple mud-brick home, still wore plain clothes, though now they were clean and without holes, still ate the same simple meals as everyone else. When people tried to give him gifts in gratitude, he redirected them to others in need. "Why do you not take more for yourself?" the antelope asked one night. "You could live like a prince with what you've given away." "I have everything I need," Hakim replied. "A full belly, a sound roof, and the joy of seeing my people happy. What palace could give me more than that?" The antelope nuzzled his hand affectionately. "This is why the magic remains strong. Your heart has not changed." One evening, as Hakim was distributing medicine purchased from the city, a stranger arrived in the village. He was well dressed but travel-worn, his eyes sharp and calculating. He claimed to be a merchant looking for new trade routes, but Hakim noticed how his gaze lingered on signs of the village's prosperity. The new tools, the repaired buildings, the well-fed children. "You seem to have weathered the drought well," the stranger commented to Ibrahim. "We work hard and trust in Allah's providence," the elder replied carefully. "Indeed, And I hear you have a particularly lucky young man here, one who finds treasure wherever he looks. Hakim felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his expression neutral when the stranger's eyes found him. Stories grow in the telling, Hakim said mildly. I've had some small fortune, which I've shared with my family here. How admirable, the stranger said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps you could show me where you've had such luck. I too would like to try my fortune. The desert keeps its secrets, Hakim replied. What it reveals to one, it may hide from another. The stranger stayed in the village for 3 days, watching, asking questions that seemed casual but weren't. On the 3rd night, Hakim was supposed to meet the Antelope, but didn't dare leave his home. He sensed eyes watching him. On the 4th day, the stranger left, but not before making a comment that chilled Hakim's blood. The Sultan is always interested in villages that prosper so suddenly. He likes to ensure everyone pays their fair share of taxes. I'm sure he'll be fascinated to hear about your fortune. After the man left, the village council met in worried conference. He was a spy, Ibrahim said flatly. From the tax collectors or worse. We've been careful, another elder protested. We haven't shown wealth beyond what hard work could produce. But rumors spread, the imam said sadly. A village that was starving suddenly thriving. People notice, people talk. Hakim knew they were right. Despite all their caution, their transformation had been too dramatic to go unnoticed forever. That night when he finally met the antelope, the creature already knew. I saw the stranger, the antelope said. I heard his questions. The danger grows. What should we do? I won't let them take what we've built. We continue, but even more carefully, and we prepare for what may come. Tell me, Hakim, if you had to choose between the gold and your people's safety, which would you choose? Their safety, always. Even if it meant returning to poverty? We survived poverty before. We can do it again if we must. The antelope was quiet for a moment, then said, You may be tested on that promise, Ja'far. Chapter 5. The Envy of the Rich and the Sultan's Ear. The stranger who had visited Hakim's village was indeed a spy, but not just any spy. His name was Qasim, and he served as the eyes and ears for the province's tax collectors, a brotherhood of sanctioned thieves who extracted wealth from the poor to fill the coffers of the rich. His report to his masters was delivered in a silk-draped room where fat merchants and corrupt officials gathered like vultures around a carcass. The village of Dusty Wells, Qasim began, spreading a map on the low table, has experienced a miraculous recovery. 3 months ago, my sources say they were dying of starvation. Now they have full stores of grain, new tools, a rebuilt mosque, and every child wears sandals. Perhaps they received charity from the city mosques, suggested one merchant, though his tone indicated he didn't believe it himself. I investigated that possibility. No major charity has gone to that forgotten place. No wealthy relatives have returned from foreign lands. No merchant caravans have established new routes through there. Then how? Demanded Abbas, the chief tax collector, a man whose greed was exceeded only by his cruelty. There is a young man, Hakim, barely 25 years old. The villagers speak of him with something approaching reverence. They say he has blessed hands, that he finds gold wherever he looks. The room erupted in skeptical laughter. Desert superstition, someone scoffed. Perhaps, Qasim agreed, but superstition doesn't buy grain or tools. I searched discreetly and found this. He produced a gold coin, placing it on the table where it gleamed in the lamplight. Paid to a grain merchant last week by someone from that village. Notice anything unusual? Abbas picked up the coin, examined it closely. Then his eyes widened. This gold, It's purer than anything from our mines. And look, no mint marks, no Sultan's seal. This wasn't coined in any official mint. Illegal gold? Another merchant breathed. They're making their own coins? Or, Abbas said slowly, his mind already calculating, they found something. An ancient treasure, perhaps. Desert tombs full of Pharaoh's gold. And they're keeping it secret to avoid paying the Sultan's rightful share. The law was clear. Any found treasure belonged 1/3 to the finder, 1/3 to the owner of the land, which was always the Sultan in practice, and 1/3 to the Sultan's treasury for the glory of the realm. To keep found treasure secret was treason. We should send soldiers immediately, one official suggested. Seize everything and arrest this Hakim. No, Abbas said thoughtfully. If we send soldiers to seize a few bags of gold, we get a few bags of gold. But if there's more, if they found a tomb or ancient treasury and are parceling it out slowly, we need to be cleverer. We need to find the source. He turned to Qasim. Return to the village. Take some men, but discreetly. Watch this Hakim day and night. Follow him everywhere. When he leads you to his treasure, then we strike. But there was another in that room whose greed surpassed even Abbas's. Murad, a merchant who had grown wealthy through cruelty and exploitation, saw an opportunity for even greater gain. Why should the tax collectors get all the profit? He thought. That very night he sent his own message, not to soldiers or spies, but to the palace itself, to a certain official who had the Sultan's ear. The message was simple but explosive. A village that was starving now thrives on illegal gold. They hide treasure from your Majesty's rightful claim. The Sultan of those lands was not an evil man by nature, but wealth and power had long since corroded his heart like rust on iron. He sat in a palace of 1,000 rooms, each more opulent than the last, yet he always craved more. His treasury held wealth beyond counting, yet he counted it obsessively, always finding it insufficient. When the message reached him through his vizier, the Sultan's eyes gleamed with avarice. "A village hiding treasure from their Sultan?" he said, his voice soft but dangerous. "Do they forget that everything under the sun belongs to me by divine right?" "It may be just rumors, Majesty," the vizier suggested carefully. "Village gossip inflated by jealous neighbors? Or it may be a fortune that rightfully belongs in my treasury," the Sultan countered. "Send my personal guard, the Black Eagles. If there is hidden gold, they will find it." The Black Eagles were the Sultan's most feared soldiers, men chosen not just for their fighting skills, but for their absolute lack of mercy. They wore black armor that seemed to swallow light, rode horses trained for war, and answered to no one but the Sultan himself. Their leader, a giant of a man named Scorpion, received his orders with a smile that would have chilled blood. "Find the gold, Majesty. Find it, seize it, and bring me this Hakim who thinks he can steal from his Sultan." "But Scorpion—" The Sultan paused. "I want him alive. If he has found one treasure, perhaps he can be persuaded to find others." Meanwhile, back in the village, Hakim sensed the growing danger. The Antelope had been visiting him in dreams, warning him of approaching darkness. He began to prepare, but not in the way most would expect. Instead of hoarding gold or planning escape, Hakim worked to strengthen his village in other ways. He used the gold to buy not just food, but knowledge, bringing in teachers, healers, craftsmen who could pass on their skills. He established hidden stores of grain in caves outside the village, known only to trusted families. He made sure every family had some gold hidden away, enough to start over if they had to flee. "You're preparing for disaster," Ibrahim observed one evening. "I'm preparing for reality," Hakim replied. Our happiness has grown too visible. Happiness in this kingdom is like a tall tree in a desert. It attracts attention, and not always the good kind. Then why continue? Why not stop now, hide what we have? Because every day we can give the children full bellies, and education is a victory. Every moment of joy we can provide is worth the risk. We always knew this couldn't last forever. 3 weeks after Qasim's visit, Hakim noticed they were being watched. Strangers loitered near the well, merchants stayed longer than their business required, and travelers seemed very interested in him specifically. That night, he met the Antelope in a new place, a cave system far from the village. "They're watching me," he said without preamble. "I know," the Antelope replied. "I've seen them. More are coming. Soldiers with dark hearts and darker intentions. Then we should stop. You should leave, find somewhere safe. And abandon you? Never." The Antelope's eyes glowed in the darkness. "We knew this day would come. The question is, what do we do about it? I won't let them hurt my people." "They won't care about your people once they have you. It's you they want, Hakim. You and the secret of the gold." Hakim was quiet for a moment, then said, "Then perhaps it's time to give them what they want." The Antelope tilted its head. "What are you planning?" "If they want me, they can have me, but on my terms, and in a way that protects the village." "Hakim, no." "Listen," Hakim interrupted. "We create one more batch of gold, enough to last the village for months. We hide it where only the elders know. Then, when the soldiers come, I confess to finding a treasure in the desert, but claim it's all gone, spent on the village. They'll arrest me, but the village will be safe. They'll torture you for information you don't have. Better me than the children. Better one suffers than all." The Antelope stepped closer, its golden coat shimmering with distress. "There's another way. I could reveal myself, show them the true source of the gold." "Absolutely not." Hakim's voice was fierce. "They would cage you, use you, turn your gift into a curse. I won't allow it. And I won't allow you to sacrifice yourself." They argued through the night, neither willing to let the other take the danger upon themselves. Finally, as dawn approached, the Antelope proposed a different plan. "We make them chase shadows," it said. "You leave the village on a journey to find more treasure. I'll leave signs, golden hoof prints in stone, leading them away from the village and into the deep desert. While they chase us, the village claims you deceived them, that you alone knew of the treasure. And when they catch us, then," the Antelope said with a mysterious smile, "they learn that some treasures cannot be seized, only given freely. But even the best laid plans can go awry when darkness moves faster than light." The next day, as Hakim was preparing for his false journey, the Black Eagles arrived. They came at dawn, when the village was just waking, their black horses thundering through the narrow streets like a nightmare given form. Scorpion led them, his face hidden behind a helmet that resembled his namesake. "Hakim!" His voice boomed across the village. "You are summoned by His Majesty to answer for your crimes." The villagers poured from their homes, children crying, women pulling them back, men stepping forward with pitchforks and hammers, tools, not weapons, but held like weapons nonetheless. Hakim emerged from his home, calm despite his racing heart. "I am Hakim. What crimes am I accused of? Theft from the Sultan, hiding treasure that belongs to the crown, corruption of a village into treasonous conspiracy. I have stolen nothing. What I found in the desert I shared with my starving family." Scorpion dismounted, his massive frame towering over Hakim. "The desert, you say? Then you confess to finding treasure and not reporting it?" "I confess to finding salvation for dying children. If that is a crime, then I am guilty." The blow came without warning, Scorpion's armored fist sending Hakim sprawling in the dust. The villagers surged forward with cries of anger, but the Black Eagles drew their swords, and the crowd fell back. "That is for your insolence," Scorpion said coldly. "Now, you will show us where this treasure came from, or your village burns." "There is no more treasure," Hakim said, spitting blood. "It's all gone, spent on food and tools." "Search everything," Scorpion commanded his men. "Tear apart every house if necessary." For hours the Black Eagles ransacked the village. They found some gold, yes, but not the vast treasure they expected. Each family had a few coins, no more than what prosperous peasants might save. The real gold was hidden so well that even the thorough soldiers missed it. As the sun reached its zenith, Scorpion's frustration boiled over. He grabbed little Ahmed, holding a blade to the child's throat. "Tell me where the gold is, or I start with the children." The village held its breath. Hakim stepped forward, and in his eyes was something that made even Scorpion step back slightly. "Release him," Hakim said quietly, "and I'll take you to it." "Hakim, no!" several villagers cried, but he raised his hand. "It's far from here," he continued, "in the deep desert. I'll need supplies for the journey, and the child goes free first." Scorpion considered, then shoved Ahmed away. The boy ran to his mother, sobbing. "You have 1 hour to prepare," Scorpion said. "Try to escape, and we burn everything." As Hakim gathered supplies, supervised by guards, he managed to whisper to Ibrahim, "The Antelope will come tonight. Trust what it says." Ibrahim's eyes widened, but he nodded slightly. As the Black Eagles led Hakim away in chains, the entire village watched. Children wept, women wailed, men stood with clenched fists and helpless rage. But Hakim walked with his head high, and as he passed, he spoke clearly. "Take care of each other. Remember what we've built. This is not the end." From a hidden grove outside the village, the golden antelope watched the procession leave. Its magical eyes saw not just the present, but shadows of possible futures, and in them it saw both great danger and great hope. "Hold on, my friend," it whispered to the wind. "The story is far from over." That night, as promised, the antelope appeared to Ibrahim in his dreams, speaking of rescue and revolution, of a journey that would become legend. And in the Sultan's palace, a greedy ruler counted his existing gold while dreaming of more, not knowing that his greed had just set in motion events that would topple his throne. The threads of fate were weaving together now. The kind young man, the magical antelope, the suffering village, the corrupt sultan, and the Black Eagles who thought they were hunters, but didn't realize they were about to become the hunted. Chapter 6. The Sultan's Night Raiders. The journey to the Sultan's palace took 7 days, and for Hakim, each was a unique torment. Scorpion had ordered that he be given just enough water to keep him alive and just enough food to keep him walking. The chains around his wrists had rubbed them raw by the 2nd day, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly on his uncovered head. But Hakim endured it all without complaint, which seemed to infuriate Scorpion more than any resistance would have. "You should be begging," the giant soldier said on the 4th night as they camped, "crying for mercy, offering to tell me everything." "Would it change anything?" Hakim asked calmly, though his throat was so dry the words came out as a rasp. "No," Scorpion admitted, "but it would be more satisfying." Meanwhile, the golden antelope had been following them, always staying just out of sight, moving like a shimmer of heat on the horizon. At night, while the soldiers slept, it would creep close enough to touch Hakim's dreams, giving him strength and hope. "I have a plan," the Antelope whispered in his mind. "Trust me, when we reach the palace, things will happen quickly." On the 6th night, something changed. Scorpion received a message by Hawk. The Sultan was impatient. He wanted the prisoner brought directly to the throne room upon arrival, no matter the hour. "His Majesty must be very eager to meet you," Scorpion said to Hakim with a cruel smile. "He has special ways of making men talk. You'll be begging to tell him about the gold before he's done." They reached the capital city just after midnight on the 7th day. Even at this late hour, the city was a marvel. Streets lit by oil lamps, fountains playing in every square, the scent of jasmine and spices heavy in the air. But Hakim saw it differently. He saw the beggars huddled in shadows, the thin children picking through garbage, the guards who beat a man for sleeping in the wrong doorway. This wealth, this beauty, was built on the suffering of people like those in his village. The palace itself was beyond description. Walls of white marble that seemed to glow in the moonlight, towers that pierced the sky like spears, gardens where nightingales sang in golden cages. They passed through 7 gates, each more ornate than the last, each guarded by men whose eyes were as cold as their sword blades. Finally, they reached the throne room, a vast hall with a ceiling painted to look like the night sky, complete with diamonds for stars. The Sultan sat on a throne of gold and ivory, despite the late hour, as if he had been waiting. He was not what Hakim expected. The Sultan was younger than him, perhaps 23, with a handsome face that might have been pleasant if not for the calculating coldness in his eyes. He wore robes of silk so fine they seemed to be made of captured moonlight, and on every finger gleamed a different precious stone. "So," the Sultan said, his voice cultured and smooth, "you are the famous Hakim who finds gold in the desert." Hakim said nothing, which seemed to amuse the Sultan. "Kneel before your Sultan," Scorpion commanded, forcing Hakim to his knees with a blow to the back of his legs. "Tell me," the Sultan continued, rising from his throne to circle Hakim like a predator, "where does the gold come from? And don't insult my intelligence with tales of lucky finds. My investigators have examined the gold from your village. It's purer than any known mine produces, and it bears no marks of age. This is new gold, impossibly new. Your Majesty is well informed," Hakim said carefully. "I am. So let us skip the denials and move directly to the truth. How do you create gold?" The directness of the question surprised Hakim. He had expected accusations of hiding treasure, not this. "I don't create anything, Majesty. I am just a poor man who—" The Sultan's hand moved almost too fast to see, and Hakim found himself on the floor, his face burning from the slap. "I said not to insult my intelligence. Guards, take him to the special chambers. Perhaps a night with my questioners will loosen his tongue." But before the guards could move, a strange sound echoed through the throne room. The ringing of hoofbeats on marble, though no horse was present. The great doors, which had been barred, swung open of their own accord, and a wind that smelled of desert flowers and wild places swept through the hall. Then, stepping into the throne room as if it belonged there, came the golden Antelope. It was more magnificent than ever in the lamplight, its coat seeming to capture and reflect every flame, creating an aurora of gold that danced across the walls. Its eyes, ancient and knowing, fixed on the Sultan with an intensity that made the young ruler step back. "Impossible," Scorpion breathed, drawing his sword. "Hold!" the Sultan commanded, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate greed. "Nobody move!" The Antelope walked slowly to Hakim, who remained on his knees, and touched its nose to his forehead. Immediately, the chains around his wrists crumbled to rust and fell away. "Hello, my friend," the antelope said, its voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "I apologize for the delay." The Sultan's face transformed from shock to an expression of such raw avarice that even his own guards looked uncomfortable. "A djinn," he whispered. "You have a djinn that makes gold." "Not a djinn," the antelope corrected, turning its attention to the Sultan. "Something older, something that existed before your kind learned to value gold over goodness. I am a test, young Sultan, and you are failing." "Seize it," the Sultan shouted. "Carefully, don't harm it." The guards moved forward reluctantly, clearly unnerved by the talking creature. But as they approached, the antelope stamped one hoof on the marble floor. Where it struck, the marble transformed to gold. But more than that, the gold began to spread like water, flowing across the floor. The guards stepped back hastily as the golden tide approached their feet. "Yes!" the Sultan cried out in ecstasy. "This is the source. Guard, bring chains of silver. They say magical creatures cannot break silver." "You understand nothing," the antelope said sadly. "Hakim, tell him the truth." Hakim stood, rubbing his wrists where the chains had been. "The antelope creates gold, yes, but only for acts of pure kindness. Every piece of gold given to my village was to save lives, to feed the hungry, to heal the sick. It cannot be commanded, cannot be enslaved, cannot be used for greed." The Sultan laughed, a sound without humor. "Everything can be commanded with the right pressure." He drew a jeweled dagger and held it to Hakim's throat. "Make gold, creature, or your friend dies." The antelope looked at the Sultan with something that might have been pity. "You would kill a good man for gold you don't need, in a palace full of treasures, while your people starve in the streets outside? My people exist to serve me. This man exists to serve me. You exist to serve me. I am Sultan by divine right." "Then let the divine judge you," the antelope said. It struck its hoof again, but this time something different happened. The gold on the floor began to move, not spreading but rising, forming shapes. The court watched in terrified fascination as the gold shaped itself into figures: starving children, sick elderly, desperate mothers. Each figure moved, acted out its suffering in golden pantomime. "These are your people," the antelope said. "These are the souls whose suffering fills your treasury." "Illusions," the Sultan spat, though his face had paled. "Tricks." "Then here is no trick," the antelope replied. It moved to the Sultan's throne and struck it with its hoof. The golden throne began to change, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of becoming more golden, it began to reveal what it truly was. The gold peeled away like old paint, revealing underneath not wood or stone but bones. Human bones, the bones of all who had died mining the gold, crafting the throne, suffering for the Sultan's luxury. The court gasped in horror. Some guards dropped their weapons. Even Scorpion stepped back. "Your wealth is built on death," the antelope said simply, "and death is all it will bring you." The Sultan, driven to rage by fear and humiliation, lunged at the antelope with his dagger. But Hakim moved faster, putting himself between the blade and the creature. The dagger pierced his side, sending him crumpling to the floor, blood spreading across the marble. "Hakim!" the antelope cried, and its voice held such pain that everyone in the room felt it like a physical blow. The Sultan stood frozen, the bloody dagger in his hand, as the antelope bent over Hakim's fallen form. Then the creature raised its head, and in its eyes was no longer wisdom or sadness, but terrible, righteous fury. "You have made your choice," it said, and its voice shook the palace walls. "Now face the consequences." Every piece of gold in the throne room, The decorations, the coins, the jewelry began to melt, not with heat, but as if returning to its elemental state, flowing like rivers of light. The molten gold didn't burn. Instead, it revealed truth. Wherever it touched, illusions fell away. The beautiful tapestries showed their true images, scenes of conquest and cruelty. The marble pillars revealed the names of every slave who had died building them. The Sultan's fine robes dissolved, leaving him in rough cloth, looking like what he truly was, a frightened, greedy young man. "Stop!" he cried. "I command you to stop!" But the antelope wasn't listening to him anymore. It was focused entirely on Hakim, touching him gently with its nose, and where it touched, the wound began to close. "Live, my friend," it whispered. "Your story is not over." Hakim's eyes fluttered open, and he gasped, drawing breath like a man pulled from drowning. He sat up slowly, his hand going to his side where the wound had been, finding only a faint scar. "You saved me again," he said to the antelope. "As you saved me. This is what friendship is." The Sultan, seeing his moment, screamed, "Kill them both! Kill them now!" But his guards didn't move. They had seen too much, understood too much. Scorpion himself threw down his sword. "I have done terrible things in your name, Majesty," he said slowly, "but I will not murder a miracle." "Traitors!" the Sultan shrieked. "All of you traitors! I'll have you all executed." It was then that the palace doors burst open again, but this time it wasn't magic. It was the people. Word of the miraculous events had spread like wildfire through the city. The poor, the oppressed, the suffering, they had all come to see if it was true, if someone had finally stood up to the Sultan. They poured into the throne room, a tide of humanity that no guards could have stopped even if they had tried. They saw the Sultan, stripped of his finery, saw the throne of bones, saw Hakim and the golden antelope, and they understood. "The Sultan is just a man," someone shouted. "A cruel, greedy man," another added. "Why should we serve him?" The revolution that followed was swift and bloodless. The Sultan, faced with the anger of thousands and abandoned by his guards, fled the palace that very night. Some say he ran into the desert and was never seen again. Others claim he became a beggar in a distant city, learning finally what hunger meant. The truth didn't matter as much as the fact that he was gone. Chapter 7, Saved by Grateful Hearts. In the chaos that followed the Sultan's flight, something beautiful happened. The people of the capital, who had poured into the palace ready for violence, instead found themselves organizing. The bakers brought bread, the healers tended wounds, the scholars began documenting the truth of what had happened. It was as if the entire city exhaled years of held breath and began to breathe freely again. But Hakim collapsed again, this time from exhaustion rather than wounds. The golden antelope stood guard over him as citizens approached, curious but respectful. "Is he the one from the stories?" a child asked. "The one who shares gold with the poor?" "I am no one special," Hakim said weakly, trying to sit up. "Just someone who tried to help." An old woman pushed through the crowd carrying a bowl of water. "Drink, young man. You've done enough for one night." As Hakim drank, more people came forward. A merchant offered his cloak, a soldier his bedroll, a child shyly presented a piece of fruit. Each gift was small, but together they formed something greater, a community caring for someone who had cared for others. "We should get him somewhere safe to rest," someone suggested. "My inn is close," offered a voice from the crowd. "He and his companion are welcome." The antelope looked at the speaker, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands. "You do not fear me?" "Fear you?" the woman laughed. "Blessed one, you just freed us from a tyrant. I'd offer you my finest room, though I suspect you prefer open skies to roofs." And so Hakim was carried, almost ceremoniously, through the streets to the inn. The entire procession was surreal. Hundreds of people following, singing songs of freedom, children running ahead to spread the news. The golden antelope walked beside Hakim's stretcher, and wherever its hooves touched the ground, small flowers bloomed, even through the stone of the streets. At the inn, which was called the Weary Traveler's Rest, the innkeeper, the woman who had spoken, named Safiya, cleared her best room. But before Hakim could be taken there, an unexpected group arrived. They were from his village. Ibrahim, grandmother Zara, carried on a litter, the widow Mariam, little Ahmed, and dozens of others. They had traveled for days after learning of Hakim's capture, pooling their hidden gold to buy camels and supplies, determined to petition for his release or die trying. "My child," grandmother Zara cried, tears streaming down her weathered face. "We thought we had lost you." The reunion was emotional beyond words. The villagers wept to see Hakim alive, and he wept to see them there, having risked everything to help him as he had helped them. The golden antelope watched it all with what could only be described as a smile. "You see," it said to Hakim later, when the crowds had dispersed and he was resting in the inn's room, "the gold was never the real magic. This is people choosing to care for each other." Over the following days, as news spread throughout the kingdom that the Sultan had fled, a remarkable transformation began. It started in the capital, but spread like ripples on a pond. Without the Sultan's tax collectors bleeding them dry, merchants began paying fair wages. Without fear of the Black Eagles, people spoke freely about their struggles and dreams. Without the crushing weight of royal greed, communities began to help each other. Hakim wanted to return to his village immediately, but his body needed time to recover from the ordeal. During his convalescence, he held court, though he would have hated that term, in the inn's common room. People came from all over the city to see him and the antelope, bringing problems and seeking wisdom. "My neighbor and I have feuded for years over a well," one man said. "Now, without the Sultan's judges, how do we resolve it?" "Share the well," Hakim suggested simply. "Take turns drawing water, help each other maintain it. Your feud has only made you both weaker. But what if he takes more than his share? Then you'll be no worse off than you were when you were fighting. But what if he doesn't? What if sharing makes you both stronger?" The men left thoughtful, and the next day returned together to report they had not only shared the well, but had worked together to deepen it, finding more water for both families. A wealthy merchant came, nervous and guilty. "I grew rich serving the Sultan, selling him luxuries while people starved. I want to change, but I don't know how." The golden antelope spoke this time. "Wealth itself is not evil. It's what you do with it that matters. Use your trade connections to bring food and medicine instead of silk and jewels. Take a smaller profit and let others prosper too. Transform your guilt into generosity." The merchant left determined, and within weeks had established new trade routes that brought affordable grain to the poorest quarters of the city. But not everyone was happy with the changes. A group of former palace guards came one night, armed and angry. "You've destroyed everything," their leader accused Hakim. "We had positions, respect, income. Now what are we?" "You are free men," Hakim replied calmly, though Safiya had her hand on a kitchen knife behind the bar. "Free to choose who you protect and why. The city still needs guards, but guards who serve justice, not oppression. Pretty words don't feed our families." "Then let me make you an offer," Hakim said. The antelope touched its hoof to the floor, creating a small pile of gold. "This is yours, enough to feed your families for a month. In that month, find new purpose. Protect merchants from bandits. Guard the weak from the strong. Teach others to defend themselves. Earn respect through service, not fear." The guards looked at each other, uncertain. Finally, their leader reached for the gold, then hesitated. "What's the catch?" "The catch," said the Antelope, "is that you have to become the men you always could have been instead of the monsters the Sultan made you." One by one, the guards took their share and left. Months later, Hakim would learn that they had formed a citizens' militia that protected the city's markets, taking only what people could afford to pay and often working for free when the need was great. During this time, Scorpion came to visit. The giant who had once terrified entire provinces stood awkwardly in the doorway of Hakim's room, looking like a lost child. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he began without preamble. "I've done terrible things, hurt innocent people. I hurt you." "Yes," Hakim agreed simply, which seemed to surprise Scorpion. "You did. I came to say, I want to change, but I don't know if someone like me can change." Hakim studied the huge man for a long moment. "Tell me, why did you serve the Sultan? He paid well and—" Scorpion hesitated, then continued in a rush. "And it felt good to be feared. I was a big child, always mocked for being slow, stupid. When I got strong, I wanted everyone who had laughed at me to be afraid instead." "And did their fear heal those old wounds?" Scorpion's shoulders sagged. "No, it just made new ones." "Then perhaps," Hakim suggested gently, "it's time to try healing instead of hurting. You're strong. Use that strength to build, not destroy. You're frightening. Use that to protect those who cannot protect themselves." "Would anyone trust me to protect them?" "Earn that trust. Start small. One good deed, then another. It won't erase the past, but it can shape the future." Scorpion left with much to think about. Years later, he would become known as the Gentle Giant, a man who protected orphans and built homes for the poor, though he never forgot the darkness he had once served. Chapter 8. On the Road Beyond the Palace Walls. After 2 weeks of recovery, Hakim announced his intention to return to his village. The people of the capital begged him to stay, to help lead them in building a new government, but he refused. "You don't need me," he told the assembled crowd in the palace square. "You have everything you need within yourselves. You've already begun. I see neighbors helping neighbors, the rich sharing with the poor, former enemies becoming friends. Keep doing that, and you'll build something far better than any one leader could create." "But who will rule us?" someone called out. "Rule yourselves," Hakim suggested. "Choose representatives from each district. Let them make decisions together. No more single sultan with absolute power. Share the responsibility and the authority." It was a radical idea, but the seeds of it took root. The capital would eventually develop one of the first council-based governments in the region, though it would take years and many mistakes to perfect. Before leaving, Hakim and the Antelope had one more task. They went to the palace treasury, where the former sultan's wealth lay untouched, everyone too afraid or uncertain to claim it. "This belongs to the people," Hakim announced to the crowd that had followed them. "It was taken from them over generations." With the Antelope's magic and the people's help, they organized a massive redistribution. Not just gold handed out randomly, but resources allocated where needed most. The orphanages received funding for years to come. The hospitals got medicine and equipment. Schools were established in the poorest districts. Public wells were dug, roads repaired, bridges built. It took 3 days to empty the treasury properly, and Hakim insisted that everything be documented, every coin accounted for, to prevent corruption from creeping back in. On the morning of his departure, it seemed the entire city came to see him off. They brought gifts, not gold, which he refused, but practical things for the journey: food, water skins, a good traveling cloak, sturdy sandals. Children drew pictures of him and the antelope. Poets composed verses in their honor. Musicians played songs that would be sung for generations. "I'm just a man who tried to help," Hakim protested, overwhelmed by the attention. "That's exactly why we honor you," Safiya the innkeeper replied. "Not because you're a king or a prophet, but because you're one of us who chose to be kind when you could have been cruel." The journey back to the village was very different from the forced march that had brought Hakim to the capital. He walked freely, the antelope beside him, taking time to appreciate the landscape he had been too pained to notice before. But they weren't alone. Word of their passage spread, and in every town and village along the route, people came out to see them. Some asked for help with specific problems. Others simply wanted to witness the magical antelope for themselves. In one village, they found a drought threatening the crops. The antelope studied the situation, then led them to a spot where underground water flowed close to the surface. "Dig here," it instructed. "But remember, the water is for all, not to be hoarded or sold for profit." In another town, two families were preparing for a blood feud over a murdered son. Hakim spent an entire night mediating, helping them see past their anger to the pain beneath, until finally the families wept together instead of reaching for swords. "How do you always know what to say?" the antelope asked him one evening as they camped under the stars. "I don't," Hakim admitted. "I just remember what it feels like to hurt and try to ease that hurt in others." "That's wisdom," the antelope said, "the kind that can't be taught, only learned through suffering and choosing not to pass that suffering on." They were 3 days from Hakim's village when they encountered the bandits. Chapter 9: Battle with the Black Mercenaries. The bandits weren't ordinary thieves. Hakim recognized some of them. Former Black Eagles who had fled when the Sultan fell, men who had known nothing but violence and chose to continue in that path rather than change. They had been waiting at a narrow pass, the only route through the hills to Hakim's village. Well, their leader said, emerging from behind rocks with a dozen armed men, the famous Hakim and his golden goat. "Antelope," the creature corrected mildly, though its muscles were tensed for action. "Whatever you are, you're going to make us rich. There are many who would pay fortunes for a beast that creates gold." "Haven't you learned anything from what happened to the Sultan?" Hakim asked. "We learned that power changes hands," the bandit leader spat. "Yesterday the Sultan had it, today you do, tomorrow it will be someone else. Might as well be us." "You're wrong," Hakim said. "I have no power. I never did. All I have is a friend who chooses to help me help others." "Touching, kill the man, take the beast. Carefully, we need it alive." The bandits advanced, but the antelope stepped forward, and its presence seemed to fill the pass. When it spoke, its voice echoed off the rocky walls like thunder. "I give you one chance. Leave now, seek redemption as your former comrades have, and live, stay, continue on this path, and face the consequences." The bandits laughed, but it was nervous laughter. They had heard stories of what happened in the palace, but greed overwhelmed their fear. "Take it," the leader shouted. What happened next would be debated by witnesses for years to come. The antelope didn't attack. That wasn't its nature. Instead, it revealed truth, just as it had in the palace. But this time, the truth it revealed was more personal and painful. Each bandit suddenly saw himself as he truly was. Not the fierce warrior he imagined, but the frightened, lost soul beneath. They saw the faces of everyone they had hurt, felt the pain they had caused, experienced the fear they had inflicted. It was like looking in a mirror that showed not your face but your soul, and what they saw horrified them. Some fell to their knees weeping, others ran, screaming, into the desert. A few tried to continue attacking, but their hands shook so badly they couldn't hold their swords. The leader, made of sterner stuff, managed to rush at Hakim with his blade raised, but Hakim, trained by his weeks of hardship and strengthened by the Antelope's magic, moved with surprising grace. He didn't fight the man. Instead, he redirected his attack, using the bandit's own momentum to send him tumbling. As the leader struggled to rise, Hakim did something unexpected. He offered his hand to help him up. "Why?" the bandit gasped, confused. "Because," Hakim said, "I've learned that the cycle of violence only ends when someone chooses not to strike back." The bandit stared at the offered hand for a long moment, then, with trembling fingers, took it. As Hakim pulled him to his feet, the man began to weep, great gasping sobs that seemed to come from his very core. "I wasn't always like this," he choked out. "I had a family once, a farm. But the Sultan's taxes took everything, and when I couldn't pay, they took my wife and children as slaves. I became a soldier to get them back, but by the time I had enough rank to search for them, they were dead. After that, nothing mattered but hurting others as I had been hurt." "And did it help?" Hakim asked gently. "No. It just made me into the monster I hated." The Antelope approached the broken man. "It's never too late to change. The pain you've caused cannot be undone, but you can prevent future pain. Choose differently from this moment forward." One by one, the other bandits gathered, those who hadn't fled. They looked lost, like children waking from a nightmare. "What do we do now?" one asked. "We can't go back to the capital. We're wanted criminals." "Then go forward," Hakim suggested. "There are many villages between here and the far borders, villages that need protection from other bandits, villages that need strong hands to help with harvests and building. Earn your redemption one good deed at a time." "Would anyone accept us?" The golden antelope struck a stone, creating a small amount of gold. "Take this, not as wealth, but as opportunity. Use it to buy tools instead of weapons, seeds instead of swords. Prove through actions, not words, that you've changed." The former bandits took the gold with reverence, as if it were sacred. As they prepared to leave, their leader turned back. "What's your name?" Hakim asked him. "Jafar. I was Jafar the Cruel. Perhaps now I can be just Jafar." "That's a good start," Hakim said. As the bandits departed, heading toward uncertain redemption, Hakim and the Antelope continued their journey. The past that had been meant as a trap became instead a place of transformation. Chapter 10. The Giant Warriors at the Palace Gates. 3 days later, Hakim finally saw his village on the horizon. But something was wrong. Smoke rose from multiple fires, not cook fires, but the black smoke of burning buildings. His heart racing, Hakim ran, the Antelope keeping pace beside him. As they got closer, they saw the source of the trouble. The village was under siege, not by bandits or soldiers, but by something worse, slave traders. With the Sultan gone and no central authority established yet, the worst predators of society had emerged from hiding, seeking to profit from the chaos. These weren't ordinary slave traders either. They were led by two brothers known as the Twin Giants, massive men, 7 feet tall each, who had made their fortune capturing and selling humans like cattle. They had heard of a village that had mysteriously prospered and come to harvest its people. Hakim and the Antelope watched from a hill as villagers huddled in the center of town, while slavers went house to house, looking for anyone hiding. Ibrahim stood protectively in front of the children, though he could barely stand himself after clearly taking a beating. Grandmother Zara sat with quiet dignity, even as chains were placed on her wrists. "I have to help them," Hakim said, starting forward. "Wait," the antelope cautioned. "Look closer." Hakim looked and saw what the antelope meant. The villagers, while frightened, kept glancing toward the hills. They were waiting for something or someone. "They're waiting for us," Hakim realized. "They have faith you'll return. That faith has kept them strong. Now we must be worthy of it." "But how?" "There are at least 30 slavers, and the twin giants are legendary fighters. Remember what I told you. Some treasures cannot be seized, only given freely. Trust your heart, Hakim. You've faced sultans and bandits. You can face this too." Hakim thought for a moment, then nodded. "I have a plan, but I'll need your help, and it will require perfect timing." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Hakim walked into his village. He didn't sneak or hide. He walked down the main path, the antelope beside him, as if he had every right to be there. The slavers spotted him immediately. "Hold!" one shouted. "State your business." "This is my village," Hakim said calmly. "These are my people, and you will release them immediately." The slavers laughed, but it died quickly as the twin giants emerged from the largest house. They were even more imposing than the stories suggested, not just tall, but broad, muscled like bulls, with faces scarred from countless fights. "You're the one they kept babbling about," the first giant said. "Hakim the Gold Finder." "I am Hakim," he confirmed, "and you are trespassing." "Bold words for a small man," the second giant rumbled. "Do you know who we are?" "I know what you are," Hakim replied. "Men who profit from suffering, men who see humans as commodities, men who mistake might for right." The first giant's face darkened. "Careful, little man. We've killed for less insult than that." "I'm sure you have, but I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to make you an offer." This caught their attention. "What kind of offer?" Hakim gestured to the antelope. "You've heard the stories, I assume, about the creature that makes gold?" The giant's eyes fixed on the antelope with naked greed. "The stories are true? See for yourself." The antelope stepped forward and touched its hoof to a stone. Instantly, it transformed to gold, gleaming in the dying sunlight. The slavers gasped. Even the twin giants looked impressed. "Here's my offer," Hakim said. "A contest. If you win, you get the antelope and all the gold it can make. If I win, you leave and never return." "What kind of contest?" the first giant asked suspiciously. "A simple one. 3 challenges: strength, wit, and courage. You can both participate against me. Surely 2 legendary giants can defeat 1 small villager." The brothers looked at each other, then laughed. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "Perhaps both," Hakim admitted. "Do we have a deal? What's to stop us from just taking the beast now?" The antelope spoke for the first time. "Try it and learn what happened to the last men who tried to cage me." Something in its voice made even the giants step back. "Fine," the first giant said. 3 challenges. When you lose, we take the beast and the villagers. If, Hakim corrected, if I lose. The first challenge was strength, as Hakim knew it would be. The giants produced a massive stone that took both of them to lift. "Move this stone to that tree," they said, pointing to a spot 50 feet away. Without help, it was impossible, and everyone knew it. Hakim could never lift such a weight, but he walked around the stone, studying it, then smiled. "You said move it, not carry it? Move it however you can, little man." Hakim went to the village well and drew up the bucket. Then he poured water on the ground in front of the stone, creating mud. He did this several times until there was a slick path. Then he got behind the stone and pushed. On the muddy ground, it slid slowly but steadily until it reached the tree. The giants protested. "That's cheating." "That's intelligence," Hakim countered. "You said move it without help." "I had no help, just water and wisdom. The challenge is complete." Grudgingly, they had to agree. The second challenge was wit. "A riddle contest," the second giant announced. "We ask you one, you ask us one. First to fail loses." Agreed. The giant's riddle was ancient and complex. What builds bridges without stones, breaks hearts without touching them, starts wars yet brings peace, and makes the poor rich and the rich poor? Hakim thought for only a moment. "Words," he answered. "Words build bridges of understanding, break hearts with cruelty, start wars with lies yet bring peace with truth, and can make a poor man rich with praise, or a rich man poor with scandal." The giant scowled but nodded. "Your turn." Hakim's riddle was deceptively simple. What is the one thing that, the more you give away, the more you have? The giants discussed between themselves for long minutes. They proposed various answers. Gold, but that depletes when given. Power, but that diminishes when shared. Food, but that runs out when distributed. Finally, frustrated, they demanded the answer. "Love," Hakim said simply. "Also kindness, compassion, and joy. All the things that multiply when shared." "That's multiple answers," the first giant protested. "All faces of the same truth," Hakim replied. "You failed to answer. The challenge is mine." Now the giants were angry, but they were bound by their own rules. The third challenge would decide everything. "Courage," the first giant growled. "Let's see how brave you really are, little man." They produced 2 cups. One contains poison, one contains water. Choose one and drink it. Then we'll drink the other. Let fate decide who has true courage. It was a death challenge, and the crowd gasped. Even the Antelope stepped forward in alarm, but Hakim raised his hand to stop it. He looked at the 2 cups for a long moment, then picked them both up. Before anyone could react, he poured one into the other, mixing them, then poured half back into the empty cup. "Now both cups contain the same mixture," he said. "Half water, half poison, diluted enough to make us sick but not kill. We can both drink and both survive, or you can admit that true courage isn't about facing death, but about choosing life." The giants stared at him, then at the cups, then at each other. "Or," Hakim continued, "we can recognize what this has really been about. You're not evil men. Evil men wouldn't have honored the contest rules. You're desperate men, trying to survive in a world that's changing too fast. The slave trade is dying. The old ways are ending. You're trying to grab what profit you can before it's too late." The second giant's face crumbled slightly. "You don't know what it's like. We were soldiers, like those black eagles. When the armies disbanded, what were we supposed to do? Fighting is all we know." "Then fight for something better," Hakim suggested. He gestured to the Antelope, who stepped forward and created a small pile of gold. "Take this, not as payment for slaves, but as seed money for a new life. Guards for merchant caravans, protectors of pilgrims, builders who can lift what others cannot. You're strong. Use that strength to create, not destroy." The first giant looked at the gold, then at his brother, then at the chained villagers. Something shifted in his scarred face. "You won the contest," he said slowly. "All 3 challenges. By rights we should leave." "Yes," Hakim agreed, "but I hope you'll leave as different men than you arrived." The giants stood there for a long moment, 2 huge men at a crossroads. Then, moving as one, they began unlocking the chains on the villagers. "Go," the first giant told the other slavers. "Find other work. This trade is finished." Some slavers protested, but the giant's authority was absolute. Within an hour, the slave caravan had departed, leaving the village free. As the giants prepared to leave, taking the gold but no people, the second one turned back to Hakim. "Why show us mercy? We would have sold your people, including the children." "Because," Hakim replied, "I've learned that enemies are just friends waiting for the right moment of compassion. You were never my enemy. Desperation was. Cruelty was. But you are men, capable of choosing differently." The giant nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. He bowed. His brother did the same. Then they left, walking into the night toward an uncertain but possibly brighter future. The village erupted in celebration, but Hakim barely heard it. He was exhausted, emotionally and physically. He had faced down giants not with strength but with wisdom, not with violence but with compassion. "You did well," the antelope said quietly beside him. "We did well," Hakim corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Nor I without you. We are stronger together than apart." As the celebration continued around them, Hakim looked at his village, scarred but surviving, tested but triumphant. They had faced starvation, separation, and slavery, yet they endured. And more than endured, they had grown stronger, kinder, more united. Our Chapter 11, The Labyrinth of the Royal Guard. The transformation of Hakim's village continued over the following months. Word of how he had faced down the twin giants spread throughout the region, carried by traders and travelers who embellished the tale with each telling. Some versions had him lifting the massive stone with bare hands. Others claimed the antelope had turned the giants themselves to gold. Hakim found the stories embarrassing, but the antelope was amused. "Legends are how truth travels through time," it said one evening as they sat by the village well, now flowing with clear, sweet water. "The details may change, but the heart remains, that compassion can triumph over cruelty." The village had become a pilgrimage site of sorts. People came seeking wisdom, healing, or simply to see the golden antelope. Hakim and the village elders had established rules. Visitors were welcome, but they must contribute either through work or knowledge. A scholar from the capital taught the children mathematics in exchange for food and shelter. A merchant from the distant mountains brought new seeds and farming techniques in return for the story of Hakim's journey. But not all visitors came with pure intentions. It was the beginning of the hot season when she arrived, a woman dressed in the midnight blue robes of the royal guard, though there was no longer a sultan to guard. She was tall, graceful, with eyes like polished obsidian that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. She gave her name as Yasmina. "I seek Hakim the Wise," she announced at the village gate. "I am just Hakim," he replied, meeting her there. "Wisdom is too grand a claim." She studied him with those dark eyes. "Humble, good. Humility will serve you well in what's to come." What's to come? A test, a choice, a chance to save many lives or lose everything you've built here. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "May we speak privately?" Hakim led her to his simple home, the antelope following. Once inside, Yasmina's formal manner dropped slightly. "I represent a coalition of cities," she began. "Since the Sultan's fall, we've tried to maintain order, establish fair governance. But there's a problem: the royal treasury. I thought it was emptied, distributed to the people. The public treasury, yes, but there's another, the secret treasury, hidden beneath the palace in a labyrinth designed by the Sultan's grandfather. It contains wealth beyond imagining, accumulated over generations, enough to feed every hungry mouth in the kingdom for decades. Hakim frowned. Why hasn't it been opened? Because, Yasmina said, producing an ancient scroll, it's protected by more than locks and guards. The labyrinth is special. It judges those who enter. Only someone with a pure heart can navigate it successfully. Others who have tried, what happened to them? They never came out. The labyrinth keeps them, though we sometimes hear their voices echoing from below, warning others to stay away. The antelope, who had been silent, finally spoke. This sounds like a trap. Yasmina turned to the magical creature with something approaching reverence. Noble one, I swear on my life that I speak truth. The coalition needs those resources to rebuild, to help the suffering, but we also know the danger. That's why we ask, not demand. Why me? Hakim asked. Because you faced the Sultan without hatred. You converted bandits without violence. You turned slavers from their path with words alone. If anyone can pass the labyrinth's test, it's you. Hakim was quiet for a long moment, thinking, if I go and succeed? The wealth is distributed according to need, with your village receiving its fair share. And if I fail, then you join the voices in the dark, warning others away. I'll go, Hakim said, ignoring the antelope's sound of protest. Hakim, the antelope began. People are suffering, Hakim interrupted gently. If there's a chance to help them, I have to try. Yasmina stood, bowing deeply. We leave at dawn. Prepare yourself, Hakim the brave. Still just Hakim, he corrected, but she had already left. That night, Hakim couldn't sleep. He walked through his village, seeing the improvements the gold had brought. The school where children learned, the healing house where the sick recovered, the gardens that bloomed despite the desert heat. All of this from the antelope's gift, wisely used. You're thinking of not coming back, the antelope said, appearing beside him in the moonlight. I'm thinking of what happens to them if I don't, Hakim admitted. This village has become a beacon of hope. If I fail, if you're left alone, I would continue our work. But for how long? You stayed for me, not them. If I'm gone... The antelope was quiet, then nuzzled his hand. Then don't be gone. Navigate this labyrinth, claim this treasury, and come back. I'll be waiting. You won't come with me? Yasmina was clear. You must go alone. This is a test of human heart, not magical assistance. Dawn came too quickly. The entire village gathered to see Hakim off, pressing small tokens into his hands. A child's drawing for luck, bread baked with prayers, a small carved wooden antelope that made him smile through his worry. We'll tend the gardens until you return, Ibrahim promised. When you return, Grandmother Zara corrected firmly. The desert didn't claim you, bandits didn't stop you, the Sultan couldn't break you. Some dusty old labyrinth has no chance. The journey to the capital took 5 days. Yasmina proved to be interesting company, sharing stories of the coalition's struggles to establish fair governance. Without the Sultan's iron fist, various factions had emerged, each with different visions for the future. Some want a new Sultan, she explained. Others want a council of merchants. A few even suggest letting the people vote for their leaders. What do you want? Hakim asked. Justice, she said simply. A system where the powerful can't prey on the weak with impunity. They entered the capital to find it much changed. The palace had been converted into a center of governance, with representatives from various districts meeting in what had been the throne room. The throne of bones had been destroyed, replaced with a simple round table where all who sat were equals. Hakim, a familiar voice called. It was Safia, the innkeeper, now wearing the sash of a district representative. You came. You knew about this? Hakim asked. "We all did. We hoped, well, we hoped you'd be willing to help once more." She led them through the palace to a section Hakim had never seen, ancient passages that predated the current structure. The walls here were carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the torchlight. Finally they reached it, a massive door of black stone carved with warnings in a dozen languages. Before it stood a small group of officials, including someone Hakim recognized with surprise, Scorpion, the former Black Eagle. "You?" Hakim said. Scorpion, looking somehow smaller without his armor, nodded. "I've been helping the coalition, trying to make amends. When we heard about the Labyrinth, I volunteered to try first, but—" He gestured to his massive frame with a rueful smile. "The entrance won't admit me. It seems to choose who may enter. The Labyrinth was created by Sultan Rashid the Wise, the current Sultan's grandfather. He was unlike his descendants, a true scholar and mystic. Legend says he designed it not to hide wealth, but to test the hearts of future rulers. Only one pure of greed and hatred could claim what lies within." "And you think I qualify?" Hakim asked. "We hope," Sophia said. "You're the only one we know who has handled great wealth without being corrupted by it." Hakim approached the door. As he got closer, the symbols began to glow with a soft golden light, similar to the antelope's coat. The door, which had resisted all attempts to open it, swung inward silently. Beyond was darkness, not mere absence of light, but a tangible thing that seemed to swallow the torch flames from the corridor. Hakim could see perhaps 3 feet ahead, no more. "Remember," Yasmina said, "the labyrinth tests heart, not strength. Trust yourself." Hakim took a deep breath and stepped through the doorway. Immediately the door swung shut behind him with a finality that made his heart skip. He was alone in the darkness, but not quite darkness. As his eyes adjusted, he realized the walls themselves gave off a faint luminescence, just enough to see the passage ahead. The walls were smooth as glass, reflecting his image endlessly, each reflection slightly different. Some showed him younger, others older, some dressed in rags, others in royal robes. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing strangely, sometimes sounding like many people walking, sometimes like none at all. The passage branched, and Hakim had to choose. Left led upward, right stayed level. He chose right, remembering that treasuries were usually built deep, not high. The passage opened into a circular chamber with 7 doors. Above each door was an inscription. Power read the first, wealth the second, knowledge the third, love the fourth, justice the fifth, mercy the sixth, service the seventh. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal with a golden key and an inscription. "Choose what you seek most, but know that only one door leads forward. The others lead to what you deserve." Hakim studied each door carefully. The power door was massive, built of iron and decorated with crowns and scepters. The wealth door gleamed with embedded gems. Knowledge showed carved scrolls and books. Love depicted families and embracing figures. Justice bore scales and swords. Mercy showed hands offering aid. Service was plain, unadorned, almost humble. He thought of his journey, of everything that had brought him here. He had never sought power, had given away wealth, had learned knowledge through experience, rather than seeking it for its own sake. Love, justice, and mercy all called to him, but in the end, his hand went to the service door. "I serve others," he said aloud. "That's all I've ever really done." The door opened at his touch, and beyond was not another passage, but a vast chamber filled with mirrors. But these mirrors didn't reflect his image. They showed scenes from his life. There was young Hakim carrying water for grandmother Zara. There was Hakim sharing his last bread with orphans. There was Hakim freeing the antelope despite the danger. But there were other scenes too, moments of weakness, selfishness, fear. Times he had walked past someone in need because he was tired. Moments of anger when the weight of others' expectations grew too heavy. His human failures laid bare. "I'm not perfect," he said to the mirrors. "I've failed as often as I've succeeded." The mirrors shimmered, and new scenes appeared. The people he'd helped, thriving. The children he'd fed, grown and helping others. The kindness he'd shown rippling outward like waves on water, touching lives he'd never know. "Your imperfection is your strength," a voice said, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "A perfect being cannot truly understand suffering. You help others because you know what it is to need help." The mirrors dissolved like morning mist, revealing another passage. This one sloped definitely downward, and the air grew cooler. Hakim walked for what felt like hours, though time seemed fluid in this place. Finally, he emerged into a garden. It should have been impossible, a garden underground. Yet here it was, trees heavy with fruit, flowers blooming in impossible colors, streams of clear water flowing through channels carved in stone. And sitting in the center, on a simple stone bench, was an old man in plain robes. "Welcome, Hakim," the old man said, and his voice was the same one that had spoken from the mirrors. "Who are you?" "I am Rashid, or rather an echo of him, left here to guard and guide. You're the first to make it this far in 50 years. Others have tried? Oh yes, the powerful, the proud, the greedy, they never get past the first chamber. They choose power or wealth and find themselves back outside, remembering nothing but a sense of failure. A few have chosen knowledge or justice, and they receive what they sought, a single piece of wisdom or a moment of understanding, before being gently expelled. And love and mercy? Those who choose love find themselves returned to those they love most. Those who choose mercy are given the chance to forgive someone who wronged them. Good outcomes, but not the path forward. Why is service the right choice? Rashid smiled. Because service is the only choice that puts others before yourself. Everything else, even love and mercy, can be selfish. We love because it makes us feel complete. We show mercy because it makes us feel righteous. But true service? That's giving without receiving, helping without reward. He stood, and Hakim realized the old man was translucent, truly just an echo of someone long dead. "The treasury is through there." Rashid pointed to an archway covered in flowering vines. "But know this, taking it comes with a burden. The wealth is cursed, but not in the way you might think." "How is it cursed?" "Whoever claims it becomes responsible for how it's used. Every coin spent selfishly will weigh on your soul. Every coin that could have saved a life but didn't will haunt your dreams. The wealth is vast, but so is the responsibility. Are you prepared for that?" Hakim thought of his village, of the starving children in the capital's slums, of all the suffering that wealth could ease. "I'm prepared." Rashid studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you are. One more thing. The labyrinth will test you once more on the way out. Remember, the truest courage is admitting weakness, and the greatest strength is asking for help." The echo of Rashid faded like smoke, leaving Hakim alone in the impossible garden. He walked through the archway and stopped in amazement. The treasury was not a room but a cavern, naturally formed but enhanced by human hands. Gold coins formed dunes like a miniature desert. Jewels clustered like fruit on carved stone trees. Scrolls of ownership for lands and properties filled shelves that stretched to the ceiling. Artwork from across the world lined the walls. It was wealth beyond comprehension, enough to buy kingdoms. And all Hakim could think about was how many people could be fed, housed, healed with these resources. He found bags near the entrance and began filling them, not greedily, but methodically. He took coins rather than jewels, easier to distribute. He grabbed several scrolls of land ownership. They could be converted to farms for the people. He was practical, thoughtful, already planning distribution in his mind. When he had taken what he could carry, he turned to leave. The passage back was different, narrower, darker, and halfway through he encountered the final test. The passage suddenly opened into a chamber where 3 figures waited. They were perfect copies of himself, but each slightly different. One was dressed in royal robes, bearing a crown. One was in rags, thin and starving. One was exactly as he was now. To leave you must choose, the royal Hakim said. Take my hand, and you leave here as Sultan. The wealth becomes your personal fortune. You can help people, yes, but as their ruler. Take mine, the ragged Hakim said, and you leave with nothing. The wealth remains hidden, but you keep your simple, honest life. Or take mine, the normal Hakim said, and leave as you entered, a servant carrying a burden for others. Hakim looked at his 3 selves, understanding the test, the temptation of power, the escape of poverty, or the weight of responsibility. But then he remembered Rashid's words about asking for help. He did something unexpected. He reached out and took all 3 hands at once. I need all of you, he said. The ambition to do great things, the memory of poverty to keep me grounded, and the commitment to service to guide me. I am not one thing. I am all of these. The 3 figures smiled and merged into light, flowing into him. The passage ahead cleared, and Hakim found himself walking toward a growing light, the entrance. He emerged to find not just Yasmina and the others, but the golden Antelope, who had apparently traveled all the way from the village. I knew you would need a friend, the Antelope said simply. Hakim set down the bags of gold, and the gathered officials gasped at the amount. But Hakim raised his hand before anyone could celebrate. This wealth comes with conditions, he said, and explained about the curse, the responsibility, the weight that would follow its use. Then we share that weight, Sophia said firmly. No one person should bear it alone. Agreed, Yasmina added. We'll create a council, with you as advisor if you're willing. Every coin tracked, every use debated, everything transparent. And so it was done. The wealth was distributed carefully, thoughtfully, with Hakim and a council of representatives overseeing its use. Orphanages were built, hospitals established, wells dug in dry villages, schools opened in slums. The curse Rashid had warned about became a blessing, the weight of responsibility ensuring the wealth was never squandered or stolen. Chapter 12. Liberation and the Miraculous Transformation. Months passed, and the kingdom began to transform. The wealth from the secret treasury, carefully managed, created a network of support that caught those who fell and lifted those who struggled. But more than material changes, there was a shift in spirit. People began to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. Hakim divided his time between the capital and his village, always accompanied by the Antelope. They had become symbols of the new age, the humble man and the magical creature, working together for the common good. It was during one of his visits to the capital that everything changed. He was meeting with the council about establishing trade routes to bring grain from the fertile north to the arid south when a commotion erupted outside. Guards rushed in, faces pale. "Raiders!" one gasped. "An army of them, led by someone claiming to be the true Sultan." Hakim and the others rushed to the walls. There, spread across the plain before the city, was indeed an army. Thousands strong, armed and armored, their banners black with a golden scorpion, and at their head, on a black stallion, rode the former Sultan. But this was not the soft, pampered youth who had fled months ago. This Sultan was lean, hard, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and madness. He had spent his exile gathering the worst elements of the kingdom: displaced soldiers, bitter nobles, criminals with nothing to lose. "People of my city," his voice carried on the wind, magically amplified, "I have returned to reclaim what is mine. Open the gates and surrender, and I will show mercy. Resist, and I will paint the streets with blood." The council looked to Hakim, who stood quiet, thinking. The golden antelope beside him was tense, ready for action. "We can't fight that army," Yasmina said grimly. "The city guards number in the hundreds, not thousands." "And if we surrender?" Sophia asked. "He'll execute anyone involved in the new government," Scorpion said with certainty. "I know him. He doesn't forgive." "Then we need another option," Hakim said. "Send a messenger. Tell the Sultan I will meet him in single combat. If he wins, the city surrenders. If I win, his army disperses." Everyone stared at him in shock. "Hakim, you're no warrior," Sophia protested. "No," he agreed, "but this isn't about warfare. Look at him. He's not here for the city or even the wealth. He's here for validation, for revenge. He needs to prove he's superior. Give him that chance, and he'll take it." The message was sent, and to everyone's surprise, the Sultan agreed. The combat would take place at noon the next day, in the field between the city and the army. That night, Hakim couldn't sleep. The antelope found him on the walls, staring out at the enemy campfires. "You have a plan," the antelope said. "It wasn't a question." "I have hope," Hakim corrected. "The Sultan has been consumed by his hatred, but hatred is like fire. It burns hot but consumes itself. I need to survive long enough for him to burn out. And if you don't survive, then you take everyone you can and run. Promise me." "I promise nothing except this. If you fall, I will ensure your sacrifice means something." The next day, the entire city lined the walls to watch. The Sultan's army formed a great circle in the field. In the center stood the Sultan himself, now dressed in black armor that seemed to absorb light, carrying a sword that legend said had drunk the blood of 1,000 enemies. Hakim walked out to meet him, wearing simple clothes and carrying no weapon. The Sultan laughed. "You come to fight me unarmed? Has your success made you suicidal?" "I come as I always have," Hakim replied calmly, "with nothing but myself." "Then you'll die as you lived, a fool." The Sultan attacked with frightening speed. Hakim barely dodged, the sword whistling past his ear. Again and again the Sultan struck, and each time Hakim managed to evade by the narrowest margin. But he couldn't dodge forever. "Fight back!" the Sultan snarled. "Take a weapon!" "Why?" Hakim asked, still dodging. "So you can prove you're a better killer? We both know that's true. You've been trained since birth to fight. I've been trained to serve. We each have our strengths. Serving is not strength. It's weakness." The Sultan's attacks grew more furious but also sloppier. "Is it?" Hakim asked. "You had everything, wealth, power, an army at your command. Yet here you are, fighting a poor man for a city that doesn't want you. Who is weaker, the man who stands alone or the one who has a city at his back?" "Silence!" The Sultan's next attack finally connected, the sword slicing across Hakim's arm. Blood flowed freely, and the crowd gasped. But Hakim didn't fall. He pressed his hand to the wound and continued talking, his voice still calm despite the pain. "I pity you," he said, and meant it. "You were born to privilege but never taught compassion. You were given power but never shown its purpose. You could have been great, a sultan remembered for kindness, for wisdom. Instead, you'll be remembered as the ruler, so terrible his people celebrated his leaving. I'll be remembered as the one who killed you." The sultan raised his sword for a killing blow. It was then that something extraordinary happened. The golden antelope, who had been standing at the city gates, began to run, but not toward the combat, around it, and as it ran, its hooves left a trail of golden light that formed a circle, enclosing Hakim and the Sultan. "No interference," the Sultan shouted. "I'm not interfering," the antelope said, still running, the circle of light growing brighter. "I'm revealing." The golden light rose like walls, and within those walls, truth became visible. Every person the Sultan had hurt appeared as a phantom. The workers he had whipped, the families he had destroyed, the children who had starved while he feasted. Hundreds, thousands of shadows, all staring at him with eyes that held not hatred, but disappointment. "Illusions!" the Sultan screamed, swinging his sword at the phantoms, but it passed through them harmlessly. "Not illusions," Hakim said softly. "Memories, the truth of what you were, made visible. Look at them. Really look. These were your people, who needed you, and you failed them all." The Sultan spun, surrounded by the evidence of his cruelty, and for the first time really saw it. His sword arm began to shake. "But here's the miracle," Hakim continued, and his voice held no judgment, only compassion. "You can choose differently. Right now, in this moment, you can choose to be someone else. It's not too late." "It is," the Sultan cried, and there were tears on his face now. "Look what I've done. Look what I've become." "I see what you've done," Hakim agreed. "But I also see what you could do. Your army out there, soldiers and criminals, yes, but also desperate people who followed you because they had no other hope. You could lead them to something better. You could use your knowledge of warfare to protect rather than conquer. You could take your understanding of power and use it to empower others." The Sultan fell to his knees, his sword dropping from nerveless fingers. "They would never forgive me." "I forgive you," Hakim said, kneeling beside him. "And if I can, I who you imprisoned, who you tried to kill, then others can too. But first, you must forgive yourself and choose to be better." The golden circle began to fade, the phantoms disappearing. The two men knelt in the dirt, one crying, one bleeding, neither fighting anymore. "I don't know how," the Sultan whispered. "I don't know how to be anything but what I was taught to be." "Then learn," Hakim said simply. "I was taught to be nothing, to accept poverty and suffering as my lot, but I learned differently. You can too." The Sultan looked up at him, and for the first time, Hakim saw the young man he truly was, barely more than a boy, shaped by cruelty into cruelty, never given the chance to be anything else. "Will you teach me?" the Sultan asked, and the question shocked everyone watching. Hakim smiled. "No, but life will if you let it. Start by dismissing your army, peacefully. Tell them the war is over. Then go somewhere where no one knows you. Work with your hands. Experience hunger and satisfy it through your own labor. Learn what it means to earn rather than take. And then perhaps you can return, not as Sultan, but as a man who understands what it means to be human." The Sultan stood slowly, helped to his feet by the man he had come to kill. He faced his army and spoke, his magically amplified voice carrying clearly. "The war is over. I have been defeated, not by sword, but by truth. Any who wish to leave peacefully may go. Any who wish to stay and help rebuild what I destroyed are welcome. But the old ways are dead. I am going to learn to be better. I suggest you all do the same." The army stirred, confused. Some left immediately, unwilling to follow a sultan who admitted defeat. But, surprisingly, many stayed, removing their weapons, approaching the city gates, not as conquerors, but as people seeking a new path. The sultan himself walked away, taking nothing but the clothes on his back, disappearing into the horizon. Years later, stories would surface of a humble teacher in a distant village, a man who taught children that true strength came from lifting others up. But that's a different tale. Chapter 13. The Sultan's Flight and the Fall of Tyranny. With the Sultan's departure, a remarkable transformation began. The soldiers who had chosen to stay were integrated into the city's reconstruction efforts. Former enemies worked side by side, building instead of destroying. The golden antelope moved among them, not creating gold, but something more valuable, creating understanding. "You did something I've never seen," the antelope said to Hakim that night as they stood on the palace walls, now renamed the People's Hall. "You defeated an enemy by helping him defeat himself." "He was never really the enemy," Hakim replied, his arm bandaged but healing. "Fear was the enemy. Greed, ignorance. The Sultan was just infected by them, as we all can be. Not everyone would have shown such mercy. Then not everyone has been shown such mercy. You forgave me when I first considered leaving you in that trap. The village forgave me when I brought danger to them." Forgiveness creates forgiveness. News of the confrontation spread throughout the kingdom and beyond. It became known as the Bloodless Revolution, though scholars would debate for generations whether it was truly a revolution or an evolution. The council that had been struggling to establish legitimacy suddenly found universal support. People who had been afraid to hope began to believe in the possibility of just governance. And at the center of it all was Hakim, who wanted nothing more than to return to his village and tend gardens. But first, there was work to be done. The kingdom needed restructuring from the ground up. The old systems of taxation that crushed the poor were dismantled. The royal lands were redistributed to farmers who would work them. The military was reformed into a protective force rather than an oppressive one. Hakim worked tirelessly, but he wasn't alone. Yasmina proved to be a brilliant administrator. Safiya became the voice of the common people. Scorpion, the reformed black eagle, trained a new generation of guardians who protected rather than terrorized. And through it all, the golden antelope was there, creating gold when needed, but more often serving as a reminder that magic existed, that wonderful things were possible. One day, 6 months after the Sultan's departure, a delegation arrived from a neighboring kingdom. Their land was suffering from drought and famine, and they had heard of the miraculous transformation here. "We need help," their ambassador said simply. "Our Sultan cares only for his pleasures while people die. We've heard you have ways of creating prosperity." The council looked to Hakim, who looked to the antelope. "We can't solve everyone's problems," the antelope said privately to Hakim. "No," Hakim agreed, "but we can teach them to solve their own." Thus began what historians would call the Golden Exchange. Citizens from the transformed kingdom would travel to struggling lands, not bringing gold but knowledge. How to organize, how to resist tyranny peacefully, how to build community support systems. In return, those lands would send their own experts, doctors, engineers, artists, creating a network of mutual aid that strengthened all. Chapter 14. Hearts Finding Each Other. It was during this time of growth and change that Hakim met her. Her name was Layla, and she came from the northern provinces as part of the knowledge exchange. She was a healer trained in the medical traditions of her mountainous homeland, where they used snowflowers and mineral springs to cure ailments that lowland medicine couldn't touch. Hakim first saw her in the People's Hall, arguing passionately with the Health Council about establishing free clinics in every district. "Healthcare is not a luxury," she was saying, her dark eyes flashing with conviction. "It's a human right. A society that lets its people suffer from preventable diseases is not a society at all." "We agree in principle," a council member replied patiently. "But the resources—" "Resources exist," Layla interrupted. "They're just misallocated. How much did we spend on that ceremonial fountain? How much on imported silk for official robes? Every unnecessary expense represents lives that could be saved." Hakim found himself smiling. Here was someone who understood that wealth meant nothing if it wasn't used to help others. After the meeting, he approached her. "You argue well." She turned, ready to continue the debate, then stopped when she saw who had spoken. "You're Hakim." "Just Hakim, yes. Just Hakim who transformed a kingdom," she said with a slight smile. "I've heard the stories, though I suspect many are exaggerated. Most, probably, though the truth is strange enough. Would you like some tea? You could tell me about your mountain medicine, and I could tell you which stories are true." That was how it began, conversations over tea that stretched long into the night. Layla was brilliant, passionate, and utterly unimpressed by Hakim's fame. She challenged him, made him think, made him laugh. "You give too much," she told him one evening as they walked through the market. "You'll burn yourself out trying to save everyone." "Says the woman who hasn't slept in 3 days because she's been treating sick refugees," Hakim countered. "That's different. That's my calling. And helping people isn't mine." She stopped walking and looked at him seriously. "Your calling is inspiring others to help themselves. There's a difference. You can't carry everyone forever, Hakim. Sometimes you need to teach them to walk." The golden antelope, who had been discreetly following them, spoke up. "She's right, you know." Layla didn't even flinch at the talking antelope. "Of course I'm right. And you, magical one, enable his martyrdom complex by constantly providing gold. When did you last create something just for joy, not necessity?" The antelope actually looked surprised. I don't remember." "Exactly. You've both forgotten that life is for living, not just serving." That night, the antelope did something unprecedented. In the courtyard of the People's Hall, it struck its hooves and created not gold but a garden, flowers made of precious metal, yes, but arranged for beauty rather than value, a fountain that ran with liquid silver, gorgeous but worthless for commerce, art for art's sake. "Thank you," Hakim told Layla. "We needed that reminder." As weeks turned to months, Hakim and Layla grew closer. She established her clinics with his help, and he learned from her that helping sometimes meant stepping back and letting others find their strength. One evening, as they sat in the metal garden the antelope had created, Layla said something that changed everything. "I have to go home soon. The knowledge exchange period is ending." Hakim felt his heart drop. "Oh, of course, your work there must be important." "It is," she agreed. "But I've been thinking, the principles we've established here could work there too. Free clinics, community support, peaceful resistance to the merchant lords who control the mountain passes." She paused. "Come with me." "What?" "Come with me. You've done what you can here. The systems are in place, the people are empowered. But there are other places that need what you offer. We could travel together, spreading these ideas, creating a network of communities that support each other." Hakim looked at the golden antelope, who had been listening quietly. "She's right again," the antelope said. "We've been so focused on this one place, we forgot the world is larger. There are children starving in other lands, tyrants oppressing other peoples. But my village will thrive without you," Layla said gently. "You've given them everything they need to succeed on their own. Isn't that what you always wanted? To make yourself unnecessary?" That night, Hakim couldn't sleep. He walked to his village, arriving at dawn to find it bustling with activity. The school was full of children learning from teachers he'd helped train but who now surpassed him in knowledge. The gardens were tended by farmers who had developed new techniques he didn't understand. The well was maintained by a water committee that managed resources better than he ever could. "You look troubled, child," Grandmother Zara said, finding him sitting by the well. I think it might be time for me to leave," he admitted. "Of course it is," she said matter-of-factly. "You've been trying to make yourself small enough to fit back into your old life, but you've grown beyond it. That's not betrayal, it's growth. Will the village be all right? The village was here before you, and it will be here after. You've given us the tools to thrive. Now go use what you've learned to help others. It's what you were meant to do." A week later, Hakim stood at the village gate with a traveling pack, Layla beside him, the golden antelope ready for a new adventure. The entire village had come to see them off. "This isn't goodbye," he told them. "This is see you later." "Go change the world, Hakim," Ibrahim said with a smile. Again, as they walked away, heading north toward the mountains and new challenges, Hakim realized he wasn't sad. He was excited. There was so much work to do, so many people to help, so many systems to change. "What are you thinking?" Layla asked, taking his hand. "I'm thinking," Hakim said, "that the golden antelope wasn't the real magic. It was always about people choosing to care for each other." "Now you're learning," the antelope said, with what sounded like pride. Chapter 15. A New Dawn for the Poor Country. 5 years later. The great hall was full to bursting. Representatives from 17 kingdoms had gathered for what would later be called the First Congress of Free Peoples. The location was symbolic. Hakim's original village, now a thriving town that served as a center of learning and cooperation. Hakim stood before the assembly, older now, his hair touched with gray from the travels and trials of the past 5 years. Beside him stood Layla, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. The golden antelope lay near the speaking platform, its presence a reminder that magic and wonder still existed in the world. "Friends," Hakim began, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "5 years ago I left this village with a dream, that what we accomplished here could spread. Today I see that dream made real. 17 kingdoms without sultans, without tyrants, without systems that crush the poor to elevate the rich." Applause filled the hall, but Hakim raised his hand for quiet. "But we cannot grow complacent. In the eastern lands, slavery still exists. In the West, children still starve while nobles feast. Our work is far from over." A young woman stood. She looked familiar, and it took Hakim a moment to recognize her as one of the orphans he used to feed. She was a teacher now, one of the village's most respected citizens. "Master Hakim," she said, though he'd told her 1,000 times not to call him that. "Tell us about the Sultan, the first Sultan. There are rumors." Hakim smiled. "Not rumors, truth. He returned last month." Gasps echoed through the hall. The Sultan's transformation had become almost mythical, with many doubting it had really happened. "He goes by Ahmad now," Hakim continued. "Just Ahmad. He's been teaching in a fishing village on the eastern coast. The children there can all read now, because of him. He came to ask if he could attend this Congress, not as a sultan or even a representative, but as someone who wanted to learn. "And you said yes?" someone called out, incredulous. "I said that wasn't my decision to make. It's yours, all of yours. That's what this new world is about: collective decisions, shared responsibility." The debate that followed was heated but civil. In the end, by a narrow margin, they voted to allow Ahmad to attend future meetings as an observer. It was a testament to how far they'd all come, that they could even consider forgiving someone who had caused so much harm. That evening, as the Congress took a break for meals and rest, Hakim walked with Layla and the Antelope through the village. Children ran past, laughing, well-fed and happy. The market bustled with traders from distant lands. The school had been expanded 3 times to accommodate all the students. "It's hard to believe this is the same place where I grew up starving," Hakim mused. "It's not the same place," Layla said. "Places, like people, can transform entirely while keeping their essential core." They stopped at the old well, now decorated with tiles telling the story of Hakim and the golden antelope. Children gathered around, begging for the tale. "Tell us about the golden antelope," they cried, just as children had asked Hakim when he was young and had only dreams to share. But now, the golden antelope itself stepped forward. "I'll tell you myself," it said, to the children's delight and awe. "But it's not just my story or Hakim's. It's the story of every person who chooses kindness over cruelty, generosity over greed, love over fear." As the antelope began the tale, weaving magic and truth together, Hakim felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Ahmad, the former sultan, standing uncertainly at the edge of the crowd. "I wasn't sure if I should come," Ahmad said quietly. "You're here to learn, aren't you?" Hakim asked. "I'm here to apologize to everyone, but especially to you. Apologies are just words. Show us through actions. Help us build something better than what you once destroyed." Ahmad nodded, tears in his eyes, and joined the crowd listening to the antelope, a former tyrant sitting among farmers and orphans, all equally entranced by a story of transformation. Later that night, as the Congress concluded its first day, establishing treaties of mutual aid and protocols for peaceful resolution of conflicts, Hakim found himself back at his old home. It had been preserved as a historical site, the humble mud brick structure where the transformation began. "Do you ever miss it?" Layla asked, joining him. "The simplicity of those early days?" "Sometimes," Hakim admitted. "When I was just trying to feed a few hungry children, the path seemed clearer. Now, with 17 kingdoms looking to us for guidance—" "You're scared," she observed. "Terrified," he corrected. "What if we're wrong? What if this grand experiment in equality and justice fails?" The golden antelope appeared in the doorway, its coat shimmering in the moonlight. "Then we try again," it said simply. "And again, until we get it right. That's what humans do. You fail, you learn, you grow, you try again." "Is that why you chose me?" Hakim asked. "Because I would keep trying?" "I chose you," the antelope said, "because when you had nothing, you still shared. When you were weak, you still protected others. When you were afraid, you still acted with courage. That hasn't changed, despite all the gold and glory." A messenger arrived, interrupting their conversation. "Master Hakim, Lady Layla, there's urgent news from the southern desert. A new warlord has risen, claiming divine right to rule. He has an army and—" The messenger hesitated. "And?" Layla prompted. "And he claims to have a jinn, a real one. He's demanding submission from all the free kingdoms." Hakim, Layla, and the antelope exchanged glances. "Well," Hakim said with a slight smile, "I suppose our work isn't done after all."